Good evening, fellow heretics, and welcome to tonight's show. I'm your host, Captain Dadpool.
And I'm Natty Nat.
And you are watching Nerds and Heresy.
Hold on to your butts.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show.
Hello. I guess we should probably start off by saying we might have a guest join just in a little bit. He is otherwise preoccupied at the moment, but when he pops in, we'll definitely add him.
Yeah, if anyone knows who Jim Majors is, he should be joining. Tonight we're going to be responding to the discussion panel of Dan. I'm just going to bring up the
video.
Screen. Share screen.
Might warn you all. Tonight might run a little later simply because it is a review.
Yeah, we're not going to play the whole thing. We're going to jump around. They kind of ramble a bit and beat the horse to death.
Absolutely.
A dead horse. I said that backwards.
But unlike most videos, we're going to start at the end.
That's the best way to do this. Oh,
play with the screen.
That's not how we do it. Okay.
No, this is fine.
What's this button do? Oh, we're gone.
Keep hitting buttons.
All right.
This is fine.
So first, we're going to play the very last 2 minutes of their video just because I think it sets the tone really well. And we'll see what they have to say.
What we're trying to do is simply...
Can everyone hear that okay?
Yeah, turn that up for him.
Thousands of followers on TikTok, and he's making these really short videos, which are powerful because, they're short and they're easy to memorize and they stick with you. Mm-hmm. What we're trying to do is show that there are, there are flaws in these points that need to be addressed. Nothing more than that. We're not trying to. We're not trying.
This isn't the debunking video or anything like that. It's we're just showing our side, showing that there's a justification, and all. This isn't an attack on him.
Right. He seems like a really smart guy, and obviously he's a very good communicator. I mean, he wouldn't have the following that he has if he wasn't, really good at communicating his views. And so, it's not like we don't respect the guy at all. I think there's I'd like there to be a mutual respect. So anyway,
I think he's a cool guy. He does woodworking. I think he makes swords.
I'm a stay-at-home dad too, so automatically I'm like, well, that's pretty cool. So,
man.
He's an awesome guy. I join his live streams, and it's fun.
Yeah.
I will say he has better hair than I do. He trims his beard better than I do, and he probably has better fingernails considering the so many things I will say are better about him than me. So
cool. Well,
all right. So they're nice. They just want to present logical arguments and rebuttals. And they like me, so
yeah, they definitely like me.
Yeah, so I'm gonna be nice, but not super nice. I'm still gonna wreck their shit tonight. But, I'm gonna do it in a nice way. Just because
they like you doesn't mean we're gonna take pity.
Again, we're gonna jump around a little bit and address some of the points. I have a very rough timestamps list of timestamps. And so we'll start with the first. They're responding to a series of 3 videos that I made about the death and resurrection, the burial of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll start with them responding to me, then me will respond to them responding to me.
Yeah,
it's gonna be.
This isn't gonna get trippy at all.
Not gonna get confused. Yeah, we're gonna nail this. No problem. Smooth.
Let's do it.
Smooth criminal over here. What? That's confusing. Hold on.
We also got a super chat.
We got a super chat?
We have a super chat.
Pause it.
Oh, thank you.
Or how would you rather do it? We should have discussed this before.
Probably should have. Why don't you just go ahead and play it through, and we'll
cool.
Pause when we need to hit pause.
Sounds good.
Let's talk about the empty tomb. I'm going to do this in 2 parts. First, I'm going to talk about what Paul says about the topic and then what the Gospels say about it. I'm going to do this in chronological order, and I'm going to do it as unbiased as I possibly can. Then you or anybody else can make up their own mind about it. Now, for cultural context, crucified criminals were never taken down and buried in a tomb. That just was not a thing that ever happened in ancient Rome. They were left up for days to be picked apart by scavengers as a deterrent to other criminals, or they were taken down and buried in a mass grave with a bunch of other bodies. This wouldn't have been a problem for Paul based on what he teaches about resurrection. Aside from that, he never mentions a burial in a tomb. So Paul quotes pre-Pauline literature.
Do we want to stop there and just talk about that claim, or do you want to keep going?
Here we go.
Here we go.
I think
We
that's
can
an
pick-
important-
Yeah, that's an important point for sure. Let's jump in right now.
Yeah.
Who wants to start?
Well, I mean, I've got the quote from Josephus. If y'all want to talk about that,
Which one of Josephus's quotes are you going to bring up here?
I don't have the citation with me. I just know it's from the Jewish War.
Let's pause there for a second.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Brahm's going to do this a few times, and he's going to do it throughout the video. But I just wanted to throw this out here really quick. Brahm, on multiple occasions, will throw out a undisclosed citation and then claim it as a source, which is not something we do in academic society.
Here's Jim.
So when he says like, well, I don't have this, I don't have the exact blah 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 here, but I want to say, and then he goes on to say his argument. I'm not going to say it completely invalidates his argument, but it completely invalidates his argument.
I got it. Jim just popped in, so let's bring him in.
Let's bring him in.
This will be the first time that Jim and I have ever met. So
Oh yeah,
this will be
hi.
fun. We're gonna get some
Forgot
quick
about that.
introductions out of the way. This is all Nat's doing. Of course, I blessed off on it. So
I mean, yeah.
hello, Dr. Jim.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome to the show. We're live. We didn't even get to make introductions.
Okay, great. I'm Dr. Jim Majors. For those who don't know me, I hold a PhD in Hebrew Bible, and I specialize in Danielic literature, and I like long walks on the beach.
That's good to know.
Samesies. Yeah, Nat just introduced me to your content and who you were. I didn't know. So I really liked your channel. A little bit I saw, and I was like, yeah, definitely. He sounds like he would have a lot to say about the topic. So yeah, we're discussing at the moment ancient Jewish and Roman burial customs, and how my argument is that it's unlikely that Jesus would have been taken down and buried in a tomb. It's not something that Romans practiced.
Yeah, it was very rare, very rare. We only have a couple of cases of it happening. Two that I can think of right off the top of my head were Josephus, and it was only because they were his friends and because he was the general of Vespasian.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into Josephus in a bit. We have a few timestamps that are pulling from him, but so moving on from what I said before, we can keep listening to their criticism of your first part.
Yeah.
The Wars of the Jews. I actually have the quote here, I think. Are you talking about 220?
Again, yeah, I don't have the number citation. I didn't write it
That's
down.
fine. Go ahead.
But here's what he says: the Jews are so careful about funeral rites that even those who are crucified because they were found guilty are taken down and buried before sunset. And Craig Evans points out that only Romans had the power to crucify Judea and Samaria, and the Jews are the ones burying because the reference to buried before sunset is a reference to Deuteronomy 21. So I think that strongly goes against.
So one, of course, I'm familiar with the passage in Deuteronomy. I wasn't talking about Jewish burial practices. I said this isn't something that Romans did.
Correct. And after talking to Pat yesterday, we know that there was actually 5 centuries difference between the Jewish law that's mentioned in Deuteronomy and the Roman law. So Romans did not follow Jewish law practices when.
Well, I think Josephus being a
and-
Jew was referencing Deuteronomy.
Yeah.
Well, and
or probably-
Deuteronomy had nothing to do with crucifixion either. It had to do with an executed corpse being displayed.
Yeah, because they would stone them to death.
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
hang up the
exactly.
body.
And whereas with crucifixion, the display was part of it. It wasn't just like something that they did as an afterthought. That was kind of the end goal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was part of it to hang the bodies up to
like don't
deter
do
other
this.
criminals from. Yeah. All right. So they talk about that for quite a while. I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit. Let's try that.
Yeah, I think those are all good points, and I'm glad that Bram brought it up because I don't think it's contested that the Jews would have wanted the bodies buried. The question is, what happened? Did the Romans allow that? And I think what the point of citing the Digest is that it's for Captain Dadpool to say that this was never a policy is just demonstrably false, and I'm disappointed that he didn't give a citation for that. Although it is true that this happened often, I think as we just cited, there were certain.
So one.
It's a TikTok. You don't have time for a citation normally.
Yeah, I made 3 TikTok videos that are 3 minutes long each. So yeah, I'm not going to give. I usually give citations when I do videos like that, though. So maybe that's what they were talking about.
There's 2 that I can think of. There's from the second century, the late 2nd century. You have Ulpian in Duties of Proconsul, who talks about it, and it says that the ones who've been punished are only buried if they've been requested and permission granted. And he goes on to say that sometimes it wasn't permitted, especially when they've been convicted of high treason. And the other one is from the late 3rd century, and it's Paulus, which is it's possibly not even a it's possibly a pseudepigraphal text, but it says that the bodies of the persons who have been punished should be given to whoever requests them for the purpose of burial, but it wasn't a dictation or a prescription. It was something that if and when they did it, it was the exception to the rule, not the rule.
Yeah. I may have overstated my claim in the video when I said it was never done, because that's not exactly true. There are rare occasions where you can, like you said.
Right. It was never policy, though.
Yeah. No, it was done by for like aristocrats, like they're going to bring up the Johannan, the nail and bone that was found in the,
which is a bad argument. It's bad because the whole point of an ossuary box, they weren't immediately put in there. The bones were taken out and they were cleaned, and then they were placed in a year after on the anniversary date, and they would clean the bones with wine and place them in this ossuary box. So even if he was buried, all that would have to happen is that they would have to know where he was buried eventually, or the pieces of him were buried, and then those pieces were put into an ossuary box.
Yeah, and like we'll get more into the Johannan fragment later, or fragment, because they bring that up later. So we'll save that for now.
Certainly exceptions to that, and there's nothing in Roman law that says yes, you were required to leave a body unburied. As we just said, it was up to the discretion of the council member or the governor, so they could hear requests and they could decide whether or not to let the body down. And so, yes, we do know from the Digested that this was something that happened a lot. Again, Philo mentioned that Philo's
not a lot.
So in Jerusalem, where this was
not
a
a lot.
big deal.
We don't have anything before the late 3rd century. I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, we don't have any attestation for the first, 200 years.
Yeah, pretty much all we have is Josephus.
Yeah.
Huge crime to have it happen. By the way, on Passover especially, Pilate was concerned with not starting a riot, and to leave a body hanging on Passover would have certainly started a riot.
But
when we talk
put a
about
body
why
on the
Pilate
cross?
would be like, where do they have any information about Pontius Pilate being worried about riots during Passover? Because that seems to be a huge part of his argument, and he doesn't have any sources to underlie that.
Well, I agree with that because it was a holy day and because Jesus was a Jew, and they were already experiencing tension between the Romans and the Jews. But I don't think that that's a good argument to make, because if he was that worried about it, then he would have given Jesus a fair trial and imprisoned him until after the festival. He wouldn't have crucified him, on the day of preparation. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I can see how you can come to that conclusion. It's just where he states it outright is where it bothers me.
Sure.
We also have an account of Pilate actually responding to a possible riot.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
He looted the Jewish temple, the treasuries. He stole a bunch of money from them, and then they protested. There was like thousands of them. that gathered. And what Pilate did is he had his soldiers dress up like them and hide clubs in their clothes. And when he told them to disperse and they refused, he gave the signal, and his soldiers started beating the shit out of everybody and killed a lot of them.
They closed the gates and locked them all in there.
Yep.
Yeah, that's how Pilate responded. Pilate is a ruthless dude.
Pilate's a dick.
Yeah, he didn't give a shit
Honest.
about the Jews' sensitivities. He didn't give a shit.
Which is another reason why thinking
mean-
that he was nervous about something doesn't stand with his character, like with
Right.
claims about his character earlier on. So
Right, especially when you get into the claims like his wife having a dream and him washing his hands of it and saying, his blood be on your hands, not on mine.
hmm
I want to read a quote from Josephus about Pilate in the embassy, passage 302. I said, but when they steadfastly refused his petition, for he was a man of very inflexible disposition and very merciless, as was a very obstinate. They cried out. Words are hard sometimes. He feared least that they might in reality go on an embassy to the emperor and might impeach him in respect to other particulars of his government, in respect of respect of his corruption and his acts of insolence and his rapine and his habit of insulting people and his cruelty and his continual murders of people untried and uncondemned, and his never-ending and gratuitous and most grievous inhumanity, therefore being exceedingly angry. Anyway, it goes on and on.
But because it's the Sanhedrin that also do it, now it's a problem.
We mean the account,
like the not giving him a fair trial, not going according to even the Sanhedrin customs. He had a trial at night. He wasn't given. They didn't wait a day to find him guilty, and it even admits in the Gospels that they had that some people were just making things up just so they could convict him of something.
Yeah, I've read a lot about the unlikelihood of the trial actually happening, how it didn't line up, didn't make sense with how trials were done back then. Like it seems like it might have been entirely fabricated, or at least only had a nugget of truth. That was
100%. They didn't even have a witness, which at minimum was required for conviction.
Yeah, and all they had was Pilate and the Sanhedrin,
right? And they didn't even have it in the place where they would normally have the trial. They had it in the home of the high priest.
Yeah, that was part of it, and that's where he confessed to being the Messiah.
Right. Well, yeah, in a roundabout way.
If you read that way.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
It would be almost impossible to imagine not being mentioned, among other things. So I think for all those reasons, it makes sense for Pilate for political reasons.
I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit.
And I think Yochanan,
And that dates to the first century, right?
I believe it does. Yeah, actually, I believe I'd have to go read it. I believe it not only dates to the first century, but it dates to around the time of Pilate. So,
really?
It would have been. I believe so. I'd have to go.
What is he talking about?
I believe it was in an area that would have been under Pilate's jurisdiction.
Yeah, so around that. Yeah, so certainly relevant at the time, as long as it was peacetime. Now that original quote from Josephus.
All right, yeah. So
they're talking about Josephus, and they mention how he's not a witness, but of course he's not a witness not until 70 AD. So he can't be a witness before he existed.
Yeah, he wasn't even born until after.
And they're talking about the Johannine fragment, or artifact? What do I call it, Nat?
Yeah, an artifact.
Johannine artifact. Okay, or Yohanan. Yeah, it's a tough one. John. It's John.
It's John.
Found John. Evidence of John. Can confirm.
Brother of Jesus. Don't forget that.
Oh yeah.
Hey. But one, he was an aristocrat, from what I understand. Like that's the type of person that would be the exception to the rule. Definitely not
judging by the family tomb that he was in, he was definitely wealthy, and so he must have just been like the screw up in the family.
Yeah. And he was buried with two other people.
Right. Well, which was common. When they would put their family members in the ossuary box, it was kind of dual purpose. One was to venerate them, and another reason was to open up a spot for the next person who died.
Exactly. Oh, sorry, trying to get my thoughts.
I might take this moment to warn you that Pat might jump in as well.
Oh,
He
dude, this will be fun.
he has shown interest, so I don't see a problem with having him pop in as well. Especially since some of these arguments were definitely up his alley.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
We have another super chat if you want to talk about that really quick.
Thank you for the super chat, Dean. Is it true that they can't even agree on what location the tomb was, like the Garden Tomb,
Right.
Tailpoint Tomb, Roas Bow? I'm not familiar with those actually.
They're actually torn between two of them: the Garden Tomb and then the traditional one, the one that everybody goes to. But it's very likely that it's none of these. The Talpiot Tomb was considered up until a few years ago, and it's been ruled out. But none of them match the descriptions of the tomb as they're portrayed in the Gospels.
No, I mean, if you're with my stance, then he was never in a tomb to begin with. But
I agree. I agree. People say that evidence of the empty tomb. I need evidence of the tomb first, especially since we don't see any veneration of it until Constantine's time, when Empress Helena discovers it, quote unquote. You would think that would be the one thing that they would venerate.
Oh, Caleb popped in too. Oh, sorry. We have Brahm and Caleb now in here. That's exciting. Sorry.
I think Sam was in here too.
Is he? Oh, gosh.
Yeah. I knew
everyone's here.
They got tagged in my video that I made today, which I forgot to do. But I'm glad. I think Pastor John tagged him.
Oops.
So I'm glad he did.
No, I am too. It's great because if they're going to comment in the comment section whenever we're talking, we can actually debunk what's going on as well.
We should just keep this going. Like, they should respond to this, and then see how many more screens we can get together in one.
Later in the video, they talk about it being like a cycle of like responding to this, responding to that, responding to this, responding to that. And that's why we were talking about potentially doing a 2-on-2 Lincoln Douglas debate style discussion with them. Not with me, with Pat. I would mod. I would step back and just make sure sources were accurate. But yeah,
definitely some of that.
The other tomb besides the Garden Tomb. So for those of you who don't know, it's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
That I am familiar with. Okay.
Yeah,
that makes more sense.
Holy Sepulchre. Yeah. By the way, if Pat does pop in here, and this thing goes on, we might do this in 2 parts. Especially with this first part of their video, they talk a lot about archaeology and ancient burial practices, which I know
Pat and I want to talk a lot about. But
yeah, the 3 of you probably have a lot you want to say.
Oh yeah, that's fair.
I'm going to step back. That's Pat's wheelhouse. I don't.
The archaeology. Yeah, we'll leave the theology and the actual biblical references to you guys.
I get paper cuts. I don't get dirt under my nails.
Aw. Say I don't even have nails.
It's unfortunate.
All right, let's keep going.
In the context that he's seeing these mercenaries, this is during the war first starting. These mercenaries are killing people and leaving the bodies on the ground. And Josephus is horrified at this. He's saying this is terrible because the Jews used to bury even crucified people. Now during the war, they're just leaving them out to rot. And so if Josephus was used to seeing crucified victims rotting, why on earth is this a big deal? No, it's different because it's the exception, because this is not how things happened prior to 70 AD. So Jesus' time up to 70 AD, this was the normal jurisdiction. So
yeah.
By the way,
if it was such a problem, why didn't he bury any of the other bodies?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we have later accounts. I think they're like 4th and 5th century, where they would just walk by the bodies with a handful of dirt, the Jews would, and throw the dirt on the crucified bodies and say that's good enough.
Well, it's not just that it's good enough. They would do that simply because they were not given the rites that were presented to them. So if it was their own council. So they would throw dirt on the bodies too
and say that's good enough.
Yep.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah, by all means, go ahead.
That is only attacking the prior he's not, you can't assess the accuracy of the burial accounts just by looking at prior evidence of how the Romans, buried victims, because the Gospels are specific evidence for Roman burial practices. You have to take both into account. And he actually does attack the Gospels specifically, but I'm just trying to ward off the common objection here that's a little too simplistic, which is that, well, Romans didn't do this, therefore the Gospels are wrong. And that's just far too simple.
And I agree. So we should look at what the Jews do. What Jews do we? What accounts do we have of Jews taking down or being given crucified victims back to their family members or whoever requests them? In this case, the two people who actually voted to have him killed. We don't have any except for Josephus, and it's because he was in a place of favor with Vespasian. It's the only reason. And he only did it to his friends. It wasn't all the Jews, just the Jews he liked.
Right. Preferential treatment.
And Pilate didn't like any of them, apparently.
Pilate didn't like his own wife.
Oh, I kind of thought the wooden nails made that clear.
Ooh.
Oh.
All right.
Yeah. Can I make one more point?
No, wait. I got all the time in the world tonight, so
okay. I don't want to hog it.
Us too.
One other thing I was going to say is that when you look at the scholars that support this, from what I could tell of the literature, this is almost unanimous. In fact, the only sources I can tell that say that Jesus was not buried are from John Dominic Cross as well. John Dominic Cross back in the 90s, which is a source.
Did he change? Yeah. When did he change his mind again?
And then Bart Ehrman, who used to believe in the burial, and Bart Ehrman's work in which he states that is not peer reviewed, it's not academic, it's a popular level book. And the frustrating thing about that is that Bart Ehrman actually worked.
Oh, hold on, a few more seconds.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Jody Magnus, who's one of the top archaeologists in Jerusalem. She's an expert on Jewish burial practices, and she.
So we actually pulled up this article.
Yeah.
Jody Magnus has a whole book on this. I mean,
Jody Magnus, who in her introduction that she said that her opinion is the unpopular opinion, and that her sources were like she uses McCain who's another apologist who wrote as one of her main sources.
And she even concedes the possibility that they could have given the body to Jesus, but as a cumulative case, there's just too many what ifs and there's too many things that would have to happen in order for that to be the case, and it's not at all likely.
It's that's exactly it. I also wanted to mention,
pulled up that article and saw that line at the top. We were like, oh wow.
No, we looked it up and we were just like, this is interesting. So 2005, so it's already a little outdated, but it's really funny because there are some other people that are going to pop up as their sources, and if we think 2005 is outdated.
Speaking of people popping up.
Oh, hey.
Hey guys, you got Dr. Jim Majors. You don't need me.
What's up, of course, we need both of you.
What's up, brother?
It's a party now.
Heck yeah.
I'm not going to say anything else. I'm just going to let y'all. I'm just going to hit the play and pause button.
Brom, I will. Yeah, we will try and link the article and put it at the base of the video later on. We're going to have a whole list of citations that we've looked into.
You know what? I think. Can I not post a thing in comments?
Unless you can just link it right away, which would be cool if you could. I don't know how to do that. But yeah.
There it is.
Hey, there it is. Okay, cool.
And there's another text that not many people are aware of called the Apocryphal of James, or the Secret Book of James, and it's written in the early 2nd century. Right. So not long after Revelation and John and all those later New Testament books were written, and it actually says that Jesus was buried in the sand. So meaning that he wasn't entombed, but he was given a shameful burial, as most crucifixion victims would that weren't drug off by wild animals.
Right. And I think that it's basically thought to be between 120 and 140, right? Kind of about the same time as first.
Yeah. Your audio is a little off, Pat.
Yeah, Pat, your mic's acting a little funky.
It sounds like you're streaming from your microwave.
Test 1, 2.
Testes 1, 2.
Oh, it was the green screen was causing the disturbance.
Obviously.
Yep. Green screen.
Oh,
Nope. We thought we were wrong. He's out.
problematic
We'll
it
come
still
back.
is.
Oh, he's gone. Well, it's fun. I'm glad glad we had him while we did.
He'll come back on. He's figuring
I
it
know.
out.
I'm gonna keep pushing forward until he does. Oh, there he is. Never mind.
That work? Better?
Yes.
Okay.
Awesome.
I had Discord open, so that was killing me.
Damn
Oh,
it, Discord messing shit up.
Yeah, Discord will do it.
Okay, onward.
Yeah.
He published an article many years before he even wrote his book where she flat out disavowed this view that Jesus would have been left on the cross, and she very much defended the idea that the burial in the Gospels is historically accurate.
Yeah, it wasn't really disavowed.
He was buried. She just said there's nothing in the Gospels that contradict what we would expect.
So I read her work. What she said was it's historically plausible.
Yeah.
She didn't say it was probable. She said it was plausible. There's a big difference. I mean, and this is the problem with, I think Jim will tell you, when an academic says, I read these accounts, what they're saying is plausible, is very different than saying probable.
It just means that, like, statistically, there is a possibility. It does not mean that it is most likely.
Exactly.
Yeah, just breaking it down for, jargon.
This is the same with Byron McCain, John Cook. John Cook, he was also an atheist and does not believe that. In fact, even Richard Carrier, of all people, wrote a whole chapter defending the burial of Jesus, at least not thinking Jesus would be left on the cross. So the people who are saying this are in such a minority, and then most of the publications of this are not even like professionally published. So that's kind of what's frustrating, is that I honestly can't think of any archaeologist in a relevant field that believes this happened. All the ones I know, as far as clone or.
And I don't need to defend Richard Carrier.
Any of the archaeologists?
Richard Carrier actually doesn't say that. No, he actually is a myth. He's defending mythicism. He makes an offhanded comment in his writing about it, right? But he's saying that, even if they would have done this, it wouldn't have been that. But he's not defending that view, and he's not framing his argument that way. Again, well, Richard Carrier says this. No, you're misstating Richard Carrier's argument when you say that. Like, again, he's asserting that there was no crucifixion at all. That's Carrier's position. So,
would you say that you believe what he just said as an archaeologist, Pat?
Well, I don't focus on ancient Palestine.
That's fair.
Okay, I can tell you that Palestine isn't the only place where people were crucified either.
No.
And
the Roman Empire existed. It's an empire for a reason.
Right. And they just recently discovered in England we used to think, well, not we, but some archaeologists thought, well, maybe they didn't crucify people in England because we've never found remnants of crosses or burials. And now they just found one. They found a guy the Romans
occupied the UK.
Right. So now they found a guy with nails hammered through his feet. So now they know. But
you'll never find the cross though, because Catholics have turned it into toothpicks.
Okay, I wasn't going to go that far, but
well,
couldn't use the nails; they were too big. All right, we're ready to move forward.
Let's keep going.
Cleekly and other people all don't believe this. So if the only people you can find supporting this are scholars who are not experts in burial, who contradict the experts in burial, who are not writing their work peer-reviewed, published, I don't think that's a good sign for your hypothesis.
Yeah. So before we move on to the rest of the clip, if we're going to steelman the position that Jesus was not buried, or that the Romans would not have allowed Jesus to be buried, what would be the strongest argument against it? Because I've yet to really find anything that.
I guess the strongest one against it would be there are the text in Judaism that, like the one that implies sometimes they were denied it. You could point to that, but I don't think that's that strong, because the only passage you can find that's relevant to Jerusalem where it says that also say, but sometimes they did bury them. So at best you could say, well, maybe it was requested but denied, but there's no reason to think that given the context.
Right. Especially because we have positive evidence that he was buried.
Yeah, I think even if we didn't have any sort.
Yeah, and I said at the beginning of the video, he was probably buried, but that was after being left up on the cross for probably several days.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't contest that at all. I just don't think he was taken down, and they know this.
Well, he even said that. Yeah.
So just to clarify, like, yeah, Jesus' body was likely buried, but not in a tomb, and probably not for several days. He was an enemy of the state. He wasn't an aristocrat. He wouldn't have been given that permission, especially not by Pilate.
I have a question. Would we consider Carrier's works prior to him becoming mythicist as accurate as those of his works when he is a mythicist?
I don't think. I mean, it's kind of like hit and miss. I don't think it's as easy as that.
I was just wondering because I was just
I take pretty much everything Carrier says with a grain of
positions.
salt.
People change positions all the time.
Well, I think Dr. Jim will agree with me. You own it until you retract it or you amend it as a scholar. So as an academic, if you write it and you say this is my analysis and you don't ever retract it, you're stuck with it. Or you can amend it. You can say you can reform, you can submit a revision. Absent that, you got to defend it, or you just get.
And there are so many texts from Paulus, from Plautus, from Seneca that talk about the crucified hanging on the cross while their entrails are being torn out by vultures and by dogs, and that the corpses are referred to as carrion. And you have these Roman guards who are set up to watch the crucified person to make sure, one, that they die, and two, that nobody removes them from the cross. It specifically says it's a story about Lucius, that he's so worried because he was seduced by a woman, and he goes off and does his thing, and he comes back to his duty station, and the crucifixion victim is off the cross, and he is so concerned because the way that he tells it is that the punishment for that is in kind, that you would be crucified as well if you let the crucifixion victim off.
That makes sense.
Didn't know that.
Well, I was just making a comment based off of a comment in the comment section. So I hope that answers some questions for them. But yeah, we can keep going if you're ready.
That's actually in John Granger Cook.
What's that?
I was just saying that's actually in John Granger Cook, by the way, in his 2014 crucifixion in the Mediterranean, or the ancient Mediterranean. The one of the scholars that he actually cited.
The two criminals were also buried. Now, I think they probably would have been given to their families if their families were there, and if not, they may have been put either in Joseph's tomb or maybe a burial plot for strangers that's mentioned in Matthew. We don't really know, but I think any of those are possible.
Caleb, you don't think this would have been rock cut tombs, do you?
Well, Joseph's tomb was a rock cut tomb. As far as the burial plot for strangers, these would be individual trench graves, but that's not the same thing as a mass grave.
So how do you feel about this rock cut tomb thing? Because my understanding that they were like dug out.
Well, if we want to talk about the geology of the area.
Well, I mean, they would find a spot that was already like an outcrop that had an overhang or something like that. Like the only rock cutting that they would do would be the loculi, like the places where you would actually put the bodies, or shelves in there, or to maybe clean up the entryway a little bit. But nobody is going up to a mountain and just all right, it's where I want it.
I would say, but that area, based off of the sedimentary topography and geology of the area, there would be a lot of cavernous areas or divots into the rock.
Thousands.
So, yeah. Well, I mean, considering, yeah.
The limitation.
Some of them, you just have to hit a wall hard enough, and then you're in somebody else's tomb.
Right. And
yeah.
The limit would be money, right? So the wealthier you were, the more construction.
Pat, are you on Discord again?
Go in.
Yeah, Pat, are you on Discord again? You're buzzing.
Am I good now? No.
You're always good, but your audio's not.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm taking the term rock cut
Now, if we're talking rock cut,
I've been reading a lot about it today, and
yeah, if we're talking about the term rock cut in the sense of having almost Egyptian style cut tombs, that's totally different than discussing like a burial ground for the people, for like the general public. So yeah, you're right. There could have been rock cut tombs for the rich.
Well, which is what they had specifically for the Jews. You had these paupers fields, or these places where the people who either couldn't afford a tomb were buried, or people from out of town were buried, or slaves, or people who had transgressed so greatly against the whoever the rulers were at the time. In this case, the Romans. Somebody transgressed against the Romans so badly that they weren't allowed that burial. But even the Jews, they had their 4 methods of executions for the crimes that they deemed to be worthy of killing somebody. Of course, none of them were crucifixions, but depending on how they were executed, that's what determined what field they were in, one of 2 fields, and they were essentially just mass graves. The only way that you would know where somebody was buried is if you were there and marked it.
And by the way, recently learned that a mass grave is not necessarily what we would think like Holocaust style mass grave.
No. It's just a plot of land,
like 3 bodies in one.
If it's a clump or like just a measurement, like when people say, recently with COVID, how there were mass graves, doesn't mean we're flinging bodies left and right. It means that we're laying them respectfully, but there is a large pit with numerous bodies.
Well, and in this case, if it was a time of war, there would be a large pit, but under normal circumstances, a body would be covered. They would be a hole would be dug and they'd be covered. But the thing is with these fields, the reason that they're referred to as mass graves is because they're not marked, and often whenever they're buried, they are not buried by the families, but they're buried by Roman by the
state.
Right, exactly. And so they were done very irreverently.
Cool.
I know Pat wants something to say, but he's still figuring out stuff. So it's okay. We can probably go on. We can always come back to it.
In fact, a mass grave was not even a grave in the Jewish word. A mass grave was like, just if you've seen pictures of almost the Holocaust, where just a head full of bodies, that's not even filled.
Yeah, we're just talking about that.
No, it's not a burial. In Judaism, a minimal burial would be being wrapped in a shroud, probably placed in a coffin, and then being put in the ground. Like how we bury people, or somewhat similar to how we bury today. But this was not dishonorable. This is
lack of wood equals lack of coffins. Moving on.
Well, your average Jew would bury their dead. There was nothing dishonorable about that. So yeah, I don't say that. That's certainly not at all the same thing as burial, quote unquote, and mass graves. And we also, by the way, have no archaeological evidence that any kind of mass grave this kind was even in Jerusalem. So as far as Roman kind, so there's just the evidence for that.
I really wish Pat was here for that.
Yeah, I have issues with that.
I can't articulate why, but I think that's wrong.
He's wrong. I can't. Pat would have pretty much the exact citation as to why he's wrong, but he's wrong.
Yeah, he would send us like a 36.
I will do some research and I'll come back to that.
Well, and in this case, we're talking about a Jew being buried. So if he was taken down at some point, and then he would be allowed to be buried, but he wouldn't be allowed to be entombed. If he had transgressed to a point to where the Romans were like, just no, and certainly Jesus transgressed enough to be crucified. And
he was a traitor, right?
Right.
I mean, treason's an absolute must. An example must be made. They're not going to bring him down for just any old reason.
Right. Well, the sign above his head, it read, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. So that the Titulist was the sign that would show people what the person's crime was, what they were guilty of. So to call somebody, himself, or to be called the king of the Jews, whether he was guilty of it or not, to be convicted of that crime was very, very serious, because
which also, by the way, is super weird, because if you're a victim of crucifixion, it took days to die. Like Jesus died in like 3 hours.
Right. I mean, it took, at least 6 hours, at minimum, and like 3 hours, tops, sometimes longer. Yeah. But yeah, and they didn't even break his legs. Usually they would have to break their legs in order for them to finally succumb to their injuries.
I'm being told right now that Jesus was executed for sedition, not treason. He wasn't a Roman citizen, which technically is true. But when Romans occupy an area, those that are in the occupation are then treated as Roman citizens, maybe not to the same level or degree, but you are treated as if you are part of the state. So when you defy Roman law, you are by default treasoning against them.
Even still, if we want to call it sedition, just a grand
sedition, it's okay.
That's still something that's not a petty crime. Like, they crucified people for like petty shit.
Oh yeah. No, Pat and I were talking about like huge. It was a capital offense to do roadside robbery. I mean, it was absolutely like.
But that was more for non-citizens and for slaves and for people of lower stature. But for somebody like Jesus, who, while he couldn't be said to be a Roman citizen because he's not pledging an oath to the father of the country, so to speak. He is still a resident of a client state, and as such, he falls under their jurisdiction, not Jewish jurisdiction. Because if you notice, even in the Gospels, the Sanhedrin had to ask for permission for everything.
Yes, and not just from like the high guard. You had to go to the governor or whoever was like really in charge of the area for any of that permission to be granted.
And if you're taking the gospel accounts at face value, if his Titulist read Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, to call it sedition, I think is like is extremely gracious.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
I was gonna say, if you're already calling him a king, then you know that there's some issues there.
Oh, but it's King of the Jews, so it wasn't that bad.
Nah.
Right, exactly.
This king is something.
It's like, oh, it was just a couple of boxes of tea. Why has everybody got their panties in a wad?
Yeah, so bent out of shape.
It was just tea. We didn't throw the coffee overboard. It was just the tea.
Yeah, just went out the window.
We're only 15 seconds in.
I know. We got another we still have almost 9 minutes to go. All right.
We're only 18 minutes in.
Oh shit.
All right.
We're close to it now.
My fault, sorry.
This might have to become a part 2.
This might have
or a
to.
2-parter. It's all good though. I'm having fun.
Literature a couple of times. We'll start with those. Philippians chapter 2, Paul is quoting a poem. He became obedient unto death, even death on the cross, and therefore God exalted him to the highest place. No mention of a tomb or resurrection. Jesus ascended to a place equal with God upon his death. 1 Corinthians 15, for he was buried and raised on the third day according to scriptures. Now there's a burial, but again, that's not weird, and it still doesn't mention a tomb. Again, those are all pre-Pauline quotes. Now let's get to his very first letter and chronologically the first book of the New Testament. 1 Thessalonians chapter 3. We believe Jesus died and rose again. Still no tomb. Next up, Romans chapter 6. We were therefore buried with him through baptism into death. Whatever that means, still no tomb. The tomb is not mentioned until 10 years later in the Gospel of Mark. That is 30 years after Jesus' death. Again, I'll talk about those in the next video, but let's talk about what Paul believes about resurrection itself.
You can stop.
All right. I can tell you're itching here.
Yeah. So this is a fun one. So according to Dadpool, Paul quotes pre-Pauline creeds in hymns that don't mention it too. And then Paul himself fails to mention the tomb, right, in his letter to the Thessalonians. So it could be assumed that Paul believed Jesus had been buried for the reasons that we just talked about, right? All of the reasons that we just laid out, we could assume based on Jewish law and all that other stuff. But we don't even really have to make a whole lot of emphasis on that, because the idea that Jesus was executed and immediately ascended to God or was just buried somewhere, but it's kind of like mysterious, seems kind of absurd. I mean, reading Philippians the way that he's reading.
So, one, it's not absurd. That was a very common belief. People were deified at their death all the time. One of my favorite examples
Pat
is
just talked about this in his show.
Right.
Oh, did he?
And there's other accounts of people rising from the dead, but they're
Yeah,
not
I was about to
entombed,
say,
they're
like-
buried in the dirt.
Caesar Augustus, the soldiers that cremated his body claimed they saw his soul leave his body and ascend to be with the gods.
Right.
Like
Not just one person,
that was
these
the
are hundreds.
common belief. Like that, there was nothing weird about that.
That's right.
The resurrection and the ascension being separated. That was weird. That was more unique to Christianity than anything else that was going on around that time.
Right. And the physical apparition.
Yeah, that too.
That Jesus just died and then automatically ascended like right away. It's just reading that passage in the most hyperliteral wooden fashion that allows for absolutely nothing to happen in between the events. But if I say I got into my car and went to work this morning, that doesn't mean that I didn't stop for gas or got breakfast on the way and so forth. I'm just summarizing something in a quick fashion.
Jesus definitely stopped for gas and got breakfast before he made it to the.
Summaries of what the early
I mean, he did eat fish.
He did.
Well, but in order for him to die, his spirit had to depart from his body.
Right.
I mean, that was necessary.
So where's the body?
That was how it worked.
Well, you're right. Well, the according to Christian theology, the spirit departed from the flesh, allowed the flesh to die, and then the flesh returned 3 days later to reanimate the body.
Yeah, which is pretty much what Paul is referencing, and I won't repeat myself because I think I go into that in this video.
Right.
Yeah.
Mark Finney has a really good book on this. I recommend it to anybody, called "Resurrection, Hell, and the Afterlife" in Judaism and early Christianity, and it goes over all of this in great detail.
Resurrection Hill.
Resurrection, Hell, and the Afterlife.
Oh, hell.
Body and soul in antiquity, Judaism, and early Christianity.
I have written it. I will look it up.
Yeah, sounds like good. I'm always looking for book recommendations.
Sounds like a super page turner. I like it.
Yeah, it's like Patreon, like you want to get over with.
Yeah, that kind of page turner.
Oh man.
historical information. It's not like you're going to include Joseph of Arimathea in a hymn or the discovery of the empty tomb by the women or in a creed. Yeah. It's pretty unlikely that you're going to see something like that. And so the point of these is that they're easy for new believers to just condense down the Christian message in a way that's really easy to remember, especially considering that not all of them would be literate, right? Or something that they would use in their worship services. And so as far as Paul not mentioning more details about the burial in his letters is concerned, this is just a really weak argument from silence.
Okay, let's talk about this.
Argument from silence, like
That's
he's
not
trying
our-
to prove the resurrection. Why wouldn't he use the empty tomb? That's the best freaking evidence there is.
Yeah.
And Paul writes the bulk of the New Testament. He's the most prominent writer in the New Testament. He mentions Jesus' death and resurrection over and over and over and over again. Never once mentions an empty tomb. That's
not only that,
at least
but his
once.
teachings, according to him, reflect the earliest creedal statements of Christianity before any of the New Testament was written.
Exactly. So yeah, I would not call this an argument from silence.
No.
I would call
But
this
they're going to
evidence
go
for-
on to talk about that for about 5 minutes.
It's more
Yeah.
like that there is a silence, and there's no need to insert anything into the silence because it speaks for itself.
Right.
Yeah.
Like there's no reason to read later literature, especially literature that's highly narrative driven, whose authors are anonymous, and then take those and then insert those and say these. Paul knows about all of these over here. He's just not talking about them. That's just not how you determine history.
Right.
You don't take
Right.
older ideas and posit them into earlier ideas that never mention them.
Right, it's just an assertion. You can't say that they have the same beliefs without having any basis for it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
When Paul writes to the churches, he has a specific purpose in mind. So when he's writing to the Corinthians, he's addressing wrong doctrine that crept into the church, right? Or he's dealing with certain pastoral issues of like people sleeping with their mother-in-law. crazy stuff like that. And so here he's addressing
jump ahead a tad.
And so the relative silence of historians that we'd expect to mention these events doesn't call them into question. I think Captain Dapool here just really needs to calibrate his expectations. And we could press on this further. I mean, almost all historical Jesus.
Who needs to calibrate their expectations here?
Apparently you.
Oh.
Okay.
I'm the one who's doing history wrong.
Right.
Scholars agree that John the Baptist baptized Jesus, right? Paul never mentions Jesus' baptism, or even John the Baptist, right? It's John the
Paul.
Weird.
Never met him.
Weird. But Paul knew Peter. Paul knew James' brother.
Right.
Surely they would have shared these stories with Paul, and Paul would have wrote them down.
Well, Luke says something about it, and Luke was a companion of Paul.
Right, allegedly.
Yeah.
I mean, Paul has no problem quoting the Old Testament, even though he wasn't an eyewitness. He's quoting stories that he's familiar with.
Even though he just takes it completely out of context, like
does.
No eye has seen, no ear has heard what the Lord has set aside for you.
Oh, listen. I don't know if you can see all these tabs here, but most of them are all quotes of Paul, or that the New Testament quotes the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And they are vastly different.
Oh, yeah.
They're completely ripped out of context. Like
clearly using the old Greek or the Theodosianic version.
Yeah. Things you don't realize when you're not a Christian.
I want to just put a really quick stopper on the comment section. The amount of rock puns happening, they are hurting me. But go on.
Are they? Oh, of course it's Wiener Schnitzel.
Yes, of course it's Wiener Schnitzel.
Just got a bunch of stoners in the chat is what it is.
Oh my god.
Boom. See, I was trying to come up with something on the spot, and just my brain's focusing on other things right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was focused until they started throwing out rocks.
Well, I'm glad they're having fun in the chat.
I am too.
You shouldn't have cursed your parents.
We're not super entertaining them in tonight's show. Love you guys.
The Baptist is not in any of the epistles in the New Testament. That doesn't mean that it was a totally legendary account that was added later. No one thinks that Jesus didn't teach parables. That's one of the most firmly established facts that we have about the historical Jesus. But Paul doesn't quote a single parable, right? Yeah. Virtually no scholar, every scholar believes that Jesus cleansed the temple. That was one of the events that led up to his crucifixion, right?
It's because these are pre-existing parables that his audience already knows.
Right? He's using the Old Testament to move.
And there's a lot of
yeah.
with that story particularly
Paul's concerned about the salvific issues. He's worried about what's gonna save them. He's not worried about establishing Jesus' historicity, because the communities he's writing to are churches or church groups. They're people who already believe in Jesus.
Yeah.
And they mentioned the story of the scholars agree, or everybody agrees, in the clearing of the temple. That's a highly problematic story too. A lot of scholars contest that actually happened. A lot of them, or at least a couple of scholars, believe it was added later by scribes.
Yep. Well, there's contradictions.
It's contradictions. Given the sheer size of the temple, Jesus just clearing it out by himself, going in there and just running amok and not getting in trouble for it. Like he wasn't arrested he would have been arrested on the spot.
Well, and between Matthew and Luke, did he do it the day that he rode into the city on the donkey, or did he go back to Bethel and then come back, or did he curse the fig tree on the way there, or did he curse the fig tree on the way back? It's there's enough inconsistencies to show that one of them is doing it for theological purposes, and two, one of them is doing it because there's clearly some sort of an oral tradition. There's some clear symbolism in the fig tree that doesn't give fruit. People are like, oh, he's a dick, for cursing the fig tree. So it wasn't even time for the fruit. It's like, well, that's not the point of the story. But the bigger problem is that there are chronological contradictions that cannot be reconciled, unless you say that he cursed 2 fig trees and cleaned the temple twice.
Or you could just say it's the same story, just written from 2 different perspectives. Come on, Dr. Jim, you should know
backwards.
Yeah, one was backwards though.
One of them was on meth.
Hey guys, I found the burning bush.
It was burning. It's not.
It smells
anymore.
weird.
Don't worry, I put it out.
You just see Peter over there on his hands and knees, just picking through the grass. Like, where'd it go?
It's right here, I swear. Yeah, okay, sure, Peter. Whatever.
I can smell it.
Whatever you say there, buddy. It's not the burning bush we were talking about.
This is not part of this video. We'll talk about this later.
Yeah, we're just having fun now. Let's keep going.
That's actually how they found the donkey. They could smell ass.
Oh yeah.
In the New Testament epistles, right? Jesus was regarded as an exorcist and a miracle worker, right? Even skeptical scholars accept that he at least had a reputation that he was a miracle worker and an exorcist, even if they don't think that he literally healed people, healed the sick, or cast out demons. But Paul doesn't.
Demons is very much a Second Temple Judaism invention.
No miracles.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was no need for prior exorcists because there was no prior possessions. It's kind of odd how the only people that you find that are possessed are the people who believe in possession.
It's a weird problem we have today.
Yeah.
Almost like we should talk about mental health sometime.
Kind of like the people who are divinely healed are always done in church, and pastors aren't going to hospitals and doing that.
Right.
Just and every amputee just doesn't have enough faith.
Yep. And you do hear all these stories about, at least I did growing up at evangelical Pentecostal, heard all these stories about Reinhard Bonnke, Smith Wigglesworth, etc. In their missionary journeys to Africa, they come back to States like, oh, limbs were grown back. You guys, so cool. Some of the things that we did over there. It's a shame.
It's the fucking lizard people. They like to throw tricks at us sometimes. I'm just saying.
I remember attending a tent revival around the time of Pentecost, and it was like a week-long thing. It was revival, just nonstop, balls to the wall. It was Holy Ghost power. You know what I'm saying? And they had somebody go up there on the stage who appeared to have one leg that was shorter than the other.
Oh no, they didn't.
And and he set down profile view to us where we could see that one leg was sticking out farther than the other. His legs were covered with a blanket, then as he was being prayed over, I'll be damned if that other leg didn't start growing.
Are you on TikTok by chance, Dr. Jim?
No, I'm I just got on it. I don't have any videos yet. I'm still trying to figure it out.
We gonna be friends?
There's you will inevitably come across a few videos of that, but with the hand. I've seen like one with
the arm thing
with the hand. They do like and I like making fun of those videos.
It's like somebody needs to do one where instead of one growing longer to match the other one, the longer one grows shorter, and he's like, "Oh shit!"
Wrong way.
Damn it! Now I'm 5'4".
Oh man!
God blessed me with height.
Whisper insoles.
Just whisper in the pastor's ear. What else can you make grow? Can we talk for a minute? You need some help over here.
Hey, can you put some of that oil on my wife? She ugly.
Oh god. What?
Are we drinking tonight? I feel like I'm drinking tonight. Let's continue.
All right. Sorry, distracting the comments.
Mentions miracles that were happening in the Church of Corinth or in the church in the region of Galatia. And so these are just some incontestable facts about the life of Jesus that are extremely well attested. And I'm guessing Deadpool would probably accept these facts as far as at least being beliefs about the historical Jesus. And anyone who has watched my channel, I don't normally just adhere to the consensus of biblical scholars without an argument. And if I were trying to go into these individual facts and try and support them, I'd give a lot more arguments in detail. But the whole point is the notion that Paul doesn't mention the burial in a tomb in great detail and all this other stuff, therefore he thinks it didn't happen, is just a really poor argument.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have
So
been
it-
important for him because it wouldn't have had anything to do with his Christology.
Right. Well, and
His Christological view would not have been dependent on an empty tomb. That's the point of making these videos.
right. And a lot what they depend on there as far as extra biblical sources are people like Josephus, Tacitus, Suetonius, Cassius Dio, which ironically are all
Pliny the
people
Younger.
who are closer chronologically to Vespasian, who attest to him being, like Josephus says, that he is the Messiah. Suetonius and Tacitus say that he healed a blind man and healed a cripple. But I don't think that they would think that that's historical.
Yeah. Oh man.
I'd like to add 2 points to that. One, a good source for learning about the strengths and the weaknesses of the argument from silence and the best ways to formulate it and so on is Tim McGrew's paper on the argument from silence.
Tim McGrew, are you kidding me?
Yeah. I didn't even want to talk about him.
Tim McGrew, man, him and his wife are thrown all the way off.
They're a little wonky.
I'm actually not familiar with him.
You are blessed, my friend.
That bad. Huh? Well, now I
have him
want to
written
look
down,
into
but I
him.
didn't want to say anything about him. So,
Whatever.
well, it's only because that's another source, and I talked about this at the beginning that there's going to be a lot of sources we're going to talk about, but Tim McGrew's one. If you Google him, it's like the Ron White of my life.
He is a philosophy professor, and as a PhD in philosophy from Vanderbilt, and he acts like he is some biblical scholar.
So he's William Lane Craig.
Yeah, essentially, like every other
sounds like
every other apologist with a doctor in front of it. Either they bought their diploma or they have it in a field that's not relevant.
Wow. Well, now I want to. I don't care too much.
Talk about it later.
Yeah, have you heard the argument from undesigned coincidences?
Yes.
That's
yes.
That's the one that Timothy McGrew and Lydia McGrew perpetuate.
Interesting. All right, keep going.
Eusebius, in his biography of Constantine, doesn't mention the death of his wife and child, Crispus and Fausta. I've always found that example pretty fascinating. But my second point is that if you look at the creed in 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 7, or however you want to define that creed, we have to ask the question, okay, if Paul didn't think there was an empty tomb, why would he have mentioned the burial anyway? It seems to me like that Paul knew that his audience meant that, that Paul knew that his audience would draw the implications.
So Paul mentions the burial, thus he's inferring the empty tomb to his audience.
That doesn't make sense. I mean, a burial. I mean, for one, there's a more accurate word for entombment that he could have used if he went to say that he was entombed, but he specifically says that he was buried, which actually kind of lends credit to the claim that he wasn't entombed. And 15:3 through 8 is it says that it happened according to Scripture, but what Scripture? Paul is claiming that he got all this information from the Old Testament. So this is an early creed, but it's an early creed based on an oral tradition, which is based on a misinterpretation of the Tanakh.
How about that? Oh man.
Of the burial, and that there would be an empty tomb implied. Yeah.
I'm going to add that paper about the argument from silence in the description for anybody that's interested.
Yeah.
I think
skip ahead a few minutes.
Silence is.
I'd like to hear them have an argument from silence.
But we don't see Paul do any of that yet, and the consensus of scholarship is that Jesus performed faith healings to a certain degree, and that John the Baptist. I think for all those reasons, simply saying it's not mentioned is a terrible argument. I think one last thing with the Philippians hymn, if he's trying to imply that the earliest Christians thought Jesus was just assumed and taken up to heaven without the mention of the burial, that's actually more of a Gnostic idea. So what you would have to do is just say that The earliest.
That is not a Gnostic idea.
That's not a Gnostic
No, it's
idea.
not.
No, that is the earliest. Gnostics believe that salvation came through knowledge.
Right.
The resurrection is not mentioned in a lot of the Gnostic texts, like the Gospel of Thomas. There's some debates about whether that would be considered Gnostic or not.
Right.
But that's not the reason.
Daniel 12:2 is the earliest reference that we have chronologically to the idea in Second Temple Judaism of the resurrection. But prior to like the 3rd or 4th century, that idea just doesn't exist. When you die, you go to Sheol, you go to a hole in the ground, and
everybody goes there. Don't matter if you're good, evil.
Yeah, exactly. And there is no resurrection. The resurrection doesn't come until you have this dualist idea of good versus evil, and demons and angels and all this other good stuff.
And that's in Daniel 11, where he mentions
12:2.
Oh yeah, where he mentions a fleshly. I forget what the exact phrase is, but it's
right.
It's like the first mention of anything like that.
Right, which is what Paul's addressing, because the Corinthians are at essentially wondering if they can expect to ascend just like Jesus did, because Jesus is said to be the first fruits, not the only fruits. You know, he is supposed to be the first of many to resurrect, and so they're saying, oh, so this is how we're going to resurrect. Like, are we going to go up like this? And Paul's trying to explain to them, like, you know, how Jesus resurrected, because they have no clue, because it's completely against everything that they have grown up believing and that generations before them have ever believed.
Yeah, and I think I talk about it here in a second, actually.
Christians believe that, and then the Gospels went to a more corporate one, and then it reversed back to the Gnostics, like the Gospel of Peter, where Jesus is just taken out of the tomb. So you have the legend growing and then reversing, and it just make it more complicated.
That's very complicated. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Anything else?
I'm
gonna start it up again. We're already a minute 22 in. Jeez. All right.
Corinthians 15. Some of you will ask, how are the dead raised, and what kind of body will they come? When you sow, you do not plant the body, you plant the seed. But God gives it a body as he determined. So it will be with the resurrection of the dead. The body that is sown is perishable, it is raised imperishable. Back up a little bit. There is also heavenly bodies and earthly bodies. It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. Paul's understanding of the resurrection isn't spiritual in the sense of a ghost leaving a body, and it's not physical in the sense of a zombie raising from the dead. It's a little bit of both, or somewhere in between. Sounds weird to us, but it wasn't really that weird to them. We think spirit and flesh. To them, it was more like a spectrum. Ever hear the story of Jesus walking through a wall? John chapter 20. The disciples were together, and they locked the doors for fear of the Jewish leaders. Yes, that word in the Greek is locked. But Jesus came and stood among them and said, "What up, fools?" Then he showed them the holes in his hands and his side. So Jesus could teleport or walk through walls, but also retain the wounds he received when he was in the flesh. I'm sure a lot of people are going to argue that's not what that means. But again, that's only weird to us. This was not weird to people who lived 2,000 years ago. They believe people could be born divine. Right. They believe people could be born of a divine being. They believe people could become divine in their life or at their death. They believed all kinds of things that seem strange to us today. All that to say, Paul's our earliest author. He knew Peter. He knew James, Jesus' brother. He had access to earlier scriptures and apparently revelations from God. But he never mentions a tomb. He never mentions Joseph of Arimathea. He never even mentions an empty grave. Those ideas came later when the Gospels were written. And I'll talk about those in part 2. Okay.
Did you guys want to hit on what he said about what Paul thought about resurrected bodies, flesh, and stuff like that? Or do you want to just keep going?
Well, I actually want to... I do quickly want to give him credit for not interpreting pneumatikos, spiritual, as not interpreting that anachronistically like some people do, and saying, well, Paul believed in a spiritual body, which means he didn't believe in a physical body, right? So I want to give him credit there. But I think all he's proven here is that the gospel accounts, especially like the Gospel of John, where Jesus passes through locked doors, preserves the same tradition about Jesus' resurrection body as Paul does, and so there's continuity there.
Yeah, actually, I would agree with that. I would echo that. A lot of people will try to interpret that scripture in a way that I disagree with, but I tend to agree with what Dadpole said about that interpretation here. So, Eric, Caleb, anything?
Yeah, N.T. Wright called that body. Trent.
Oh, go ahead, Brand. You're
Go ahead.
Oh no, you're. I was just going to say,
You guys are too polite.
Yeah, acting like a couple of Canadians in here.
Speaking of Canadians,
Got a few of them.
There's
That's
Pat.
the closest to Canada after this.
Yeah, I'm probably right behind him, but I guess I don't really find it that weird. This is just kind of like a modern scoffing. He says that was weird to them. I don't think that's weird to Christians.
so I said that's weird. That was weird is because it was weird to me. Like growing up a Christian, I always thought it was a bodily, like Jesus literally came back to life with a restored body, his old, and then like as an atheist reading the text, it starts to sound more spiritual. And then, but it seems like Paul's contradicting himself. So then I'm like, what's going on here? So then I started really trying to figure out what Paul's stance on a resurrected body would be in that time period. So that was new information to me. I was like, how can it both be fleshly and spiritual at the same time? That doesn't make sense to my tiny brain.
Well, because you have the body that's in the hole, and then you have the spirit where as soon as you die, that's that goes to Sheol. If you look in 1 Samuel 28, where it's talking about the witch of Endor, Paul asked the witch of Endor, says, consult a spirit, bring up a spirit for me, the spirit that I named to you. And so the witch of Endor raises up,
like, why did you wake me?
Right. They raise up this spirit. The spirit of Samuel is brought up from Sheol and converses with Saul and then goes back. So that's the exact nature of the resurrection. That is a spiritual resurrection. He didn't raise the body. He raised the spirit.
But then somehow their flesh is restored. Like Paul's analogy of the planting a seed, it seems like the body came from the old body, but the old body was still left to decay, but the spirit came up, and then you received a new body. Like it says that in the Gospels, the gardener or Mary Magdalene, who was at the tomb, didn't recognize him because it was a new body, and that's what Paul's saying. You're going to receive a new body.
Well, even in Matthew, when there's two earthquakes. There's an earthquake when Jesus dies, and an earthquake when the angel descends from heaven and rolls back the stone. The first one shakes open the graves of the saints, and the second one brings the saints out of the ground, and they bodily resurrect from the grave and into a new body, and they enter into the city. It's something that you see. It's what we see starting in Daniel 12:2 is this spiritual raising going on instead of just a spiritual one, because the flesh is dead according to First Temple Jews. The flesh is flesh. Like the resurrection would require a new body for your spirits to go into.
Yeah. So yeah, it's very different from what I was taught in Bible college.
So would that also be possession?
Well, no, because possession, I guess, implies that somebody else has ownership of the quote unquote tomb, is what they would have called it.
Okay.
It would be your body, but it would be like your exalted body, your heavenly body.
Right, and it's actually of a new substance. It's of the same substance that Jesus was made of, according to the early Christian belief.
I just study what's left behind, and if they take it with them, then I can't do anything about it.
Oh, you mean all their clothes like nice and folded up and
yeah,
like just got a bunch of naked people flying through the air. No big deal.
To me, this is kind of like, sure, it's interesting, and I guess this is the part where I just kind of agreed with him the most, but I didn't find it as like, I'm embarrassed of this, Jesus also eats fish. I mean, in the
jump ahead a little bit
from where Jesus appears and walks through locked doors, he also invites Thomas to touch him.
His brothers and his father's household. I think that's good enough.
Yeah.
But okay.
So for the audience, can you kind of connect the dots there?
Yeah, and what Daphne is saying is that Mark took this story, reshaped it, didn't even change it. Okay, so 2 points to make here. One is the point about Genesis 50. Two is the point about Arimathea.
Bear with me.
Or maybe I can give the Arimathea. I do quickly want to give him credit for not interpreting pneumatikos, spiritual, as...
Went back too far.
Joseph, right? Now we go to Mark.
Actually, places like TikTok and Twitter and stuff like that, it can get kind of crazy. So
yeah, I wanted to make that disclaimer because we didn't do it in the beginning, and I know how combative certain things like this can be unintentionally. And I kind of want to diffuse that. But, you guys ready to keep on?
Cool. Part 2. Part 1, I talked about all the things that Paul mentions and believes about the resurrection of Jesus, and how he never mentions an empty tomb or an empty grave or Joseph of Arimathea. Again, those are earliest writings on the resurrection from 20 years and earlier to Jesus' death. Now we'll go to the Gospels in chronological order and see how the story continued to evolve. Before we do that, though, I'm going to show you that these stories now have a whole lot of narrative built around them, and I'm going to show you where that narrative almost certainly came from. Genesis chapter 50. Joseph's father had just died, so he went to the Pharaoh and begged him for the body of his father so that he could bury it in a tomb that he had dug for himself. Joseph, right? Now we go to Mark. And suddenly a wild Joseph of Arimathea appears. He is a prominent member of the council, and he asked Pilate for the body of Jesus so that he could bury it in a tomb. Now it's Joseph of Arimathea. The problem is Arimathea is not a real place. Some people try to argue that it translates into the land of the Lord or something like that in some generic sense, but strictly speaking, there is no place in the archaeological record of the existence of a place called Arimathea. Onward to Matthew.
Before you go,
You want to
Graham.
stop right here?
Yeah, before you go, I do really want to say I appreciate the Pokemon reference.
I didn't grow up with Pokemon, so that went over my head.
Oh, yeah.
He's
fair enough.
18. He doesn't know.
I know. I always forget Bram is a prodigy. So.
Yeah, right.
It's not the word I'd use.
Right. While kids were playing Pokemon, he was reading James Dunn. And, right. So
He was reading the Septuagint in Greek.
I wish. By the way, do you think you can take away the thumbnail? Because like while we're talking,
Like
it
this?
seems to slow down the internet and make people lag for me. Yeah, that much better. Thank you. Okay, so 2 points to make here. One is the point about Genesis 50. Two is the point about Arimathea. Or maybe I can give the Arimathea point to someone else if they want to take it. But I definitely want to talk about Genesis 50. So let me read again the verses from Genesis 50, which he says that Mark is basing his story off of. And I'm going to start at verse 4. And when the days of weeping for him were past, Joseph spoke to the house of Pharaoh, saying, If now I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the ears of Pharaoh, saying, My father made me swear, saying, I'm about to die. In my tomb that I hewed out for myself, in the land of Canaan, there you shall bury me. Now therefore, let me please go up and bury my father. There I will return. And Pharaoh answered, Go up and bury your father, as he made you swear. Blah, 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 blah. With him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, as well as all the household of Pharaoh, his brothers and his father's household. I think that's good enough. But, okay. Well,
So for the audience, can you kind of connect the dots there?
Yeah, and what Daphne was saying is that Mark took this story, reshaped it, didn't even change the name Joseph, and he made his own edition of it, his own version of it. But I think there's just way too many disanalogies here for us to say that that's plausible. One is that Joseph's father hews out the rock for himself. He doesn't hew it out for someone else. Where are the 70 days of...
And Joseph of Arimathea dug out the tomb for himself. And was it Matthew's account? Because they're all four different.
In Matthew's account, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, same story so far.
Yeah.
Of weeping and, the days of embalming the body and all these other things. there's just no explicit reference to here, and I'm having a little bit part of the time understanding why he actually thinks this is plausible. I'm not trying to be rude or anything like that.
It's again because it's the exact same story. This is how they wrote these stories. There's all kinds of writings about this. I have a book called The Power of Parable. Talks all about how they wrote these stories and how they used other sources for inspiration. So when you read the account in Genesis 50, it's the exact same story. They didn't even change the name. Like, that's the point I keep making. But and they're accusing me of parallel. What's the word? Parallelomania. That word, parallelmania. Why was that so hard? But I'm willing to bet at least probably most of these guys, if not all of them, will then turn around and say Psalm 53, or sorry, Isaiah 53, the suffering servant is actually talking about Jesus. Psalms, was it chapter 5, is actually talking about Jesus. When there's, when they're not even messianic prophecies, those would be a much, much bigger stretch to make than the one I'm positing. So it goes both ways. If I can't make connections between Jesus and the Old Testament,
right?
Can you?
This is something that a Jewish audience would be listening to, and while a non-Jewish audience wouldn't pick up on it immediately, even somebody who might have been, somewhat familiar with the Hebrew scriptures, the Jews most certainly would have picked up on it. They've been like, "Oh, wow, that sounds really familiar." It's just like Jesus and Joshua, both being, God's main man, his conqueror. That they would see. They would see a similarity there, or the people who are reading the Septuagint and reading Isaiah 7:14, and they're reading Parthenon, instead of Ha'alma, and so they think virgin birth. So virgin birth to them, that sounds like Isaiah to me.
Yeah, and it goes the other way too. Like Christians will teach that Daniel. Daniel, they say that Daniel 9 is a reference to the Messiah. Well, Paul never quotes. Why doesn't Paul ever quote Daniel 9?
Daniel 9, 24 through 27. Well, not only does he not do it, Jesus doesn't do it.
Jesus didn't do it either, because their audience would have fucking known better if they did.
Right, because the audience knows that this was applying to a time that happened before them, and the people who were reinterpreting it as a secondary apocalyptic interpretation were applying it to the Roman rule they were currently under, and not Antiochus IV, and certainly not seeing it as some the fulfillment of the last week coming 2,000 years later. That certainly wasn't the case.
It's also really weird though that Matthew quotes Isaiah for the virgin birth, when that they would have known it wouldn't have been a virgin, and that child is born in the next chapter.
Unless they were so Hellenized that the Septuagint translation would have kind of reformed that text, to that generation, that they would have been okay with, reading virgin into it, just because all the Hellenistic influences that they already had around them. They certainly weren't the same Jews that we see coming out of exile.
Yeah. What was it we were talking with Pat yesterday? That
which part
they would have been reading they would have been reading it in Aramaic,
right?
Because Hebrew was an ancient
right. So to say that only 3% of the population had literacy, and then having it written in Aramaic, but then writing the locations in its specific language.
Closer to the Babylonian exile, it probably would have been Aramaic, but in the first century, in Jesus' time, they would have been reading it in only liturgical settings. So in liturgical settings, the ones who were in charge of the temple were generally the most pious people up until Menelaus and so on and so forth. But in the first century, the more pious would have stuck to the Hebrew, just because they would want to retain that. They wouldn't want to, because the only reason that they resorted to Aramaic was because of their time in Babylon, in the Babylonian exile. That's what they had to learn, and so that's what was the familiar tongue for them.
Yeah. What was Pat's source on the percentage of literacy? I forgot which one he sent us on that. I haven't. Sorry, there was a question in the chat that says 3%. It's like, yes, it is. It's pretty definitively 3%, but it doesn't even matter if it's
like
still if it's like 5%, 10%.
I've heard 6%.
Still a minority.
Like 6% is like the most generous estimate I think I've heard.
Yeah, and I mean,
so we can say 6%. Fine.
Carol Vandertorn has a book called Scribal Culture and the Making of the Hebrew Bible that talks about scribal literacy rates and literacy rates in general.
Oh, cool.
Well, that was
did you get that, Nat?
So Carol Vanderhorn, is that what you said?
Vandertorn, Toorn.
RN, and it's literacy rating.
Yeah, it's called a Scribal Culture and the Hebrew Bible, or something like that.
Wait, is that like that?
I will message Pat really quick to jump back into the chat with the with that source, because I have someone that wants it.
Is that that $210 book?
No,
it probably
no,
is.
that's the Catherine Hetzer book that we will be talking about in a moment.
Okay. Did I skip past?
No, you haven't gotten to it yet.
Arimathea being a real place?
No, that's just they're about to start talking about Joseph and how Arimathea is not a real place, and how we were kind of joking that what was he, a 13th disciple or something.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah,
the 73rd.
So if anybody else wants to make a point about that, but before that, also his contention that Arimathea isn't a real town, I don't think is true either. Because we have a word in First Maccabees chapter 11 verse 34.
Oh my gosh!
Which looks a lot like the word Arimathea.
A word from First Maccabees, or that looks like.
I like that. That looks like.
Okay, I'm just gonna plow through that one.
And also, and that's a Greek.
It's a Texas sharpshooter fallacy, by the way. Anyway. But
also,
just had to throw that in there.
Samuel, there's a word that looks like the Hebrew equivalent of that same town. And
yeah, the Hebrew. Okay.
So I think this is another example of a town that existed. We just don't have any other archaeological evidence for.
Okay, that's what we were talking about. Sorry.
Yeah.
We were talking about how Arimathea is a place, but there's no archaeological reasoning for it. But at the same time, when you say it's Josephus of Arimathea, you're literally saying it's Joseph from that one Jewish town.
Right.
Like, it's a generalization.
Right.
And weren't they just accusing me of making
reference to Joseph of Arimathea in any text? And this is the only reference of anybody who is from Arimathea in any text.
Right. So how do we know that's actually like this? If there's only one reference to it and it's a generalized statement, then there's a chance that they just didn't know who he was or where he was from. So they're like, well, where was he from? And he'll, I don't know, from Jewish town. Like, just mentioning it in passing.
And he makes the point that we just recently discovered Nazareth. The problem is we have much better attestation to the existence of Nazareth.
Right.
In several different sources.
Right.
Arimathea, we don't have anything other than the gospel.
Right.
So yeah, and if there was a Pharisee, like if Joseph of Arimathea was a Pharisee and a member of the council, and it wouldn't have been a little rinky-dink town like Nazareth was, it probably would have had a little bit more notoriety.
If he had money.
Yeah, Nazareth was a little hole in the ground place. Like we're lucky that we found it at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm familiar. It's pretty crazy. All right, yeah.
More notes. No,
but I love that he can look at other books and with a word and in a different language, it looks like it could mean this, but I can't say, hey, this is the same story as Genesis 50.
Well, I mean, I would like to reiterate what I said at the very beginning of this, which is there's a lot of times that Brahm's going to bring in a source that isn't a source. So take with that what you will.
Apply the same standards to me that you apply to yourself.
Yeah.
That's all I ask. That's all I want anybody to do.
And Vinny, if you're asking about, if you're continuing to wonder about literacy, Pat has some information for you in the chat. So go ahead.
Cool.
Before we discovered Nazareth, Nazareth was only mentioned by Eusebius. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's one of those. That used to be one of Richard Carrier's favorite talking points.
Really, because it's mentioned by the Pharisees in the Gospels.
Anybody else?
Carrier's idea that Arimathea means town of the best disciples.
It's about, oh gosh.
Or it might mean the town of the Jews. So it would be saying
that one
Joseph,
town.
Joseph from the land of the Jews. So it might have even been a derogatory title.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into that. I could. I'm not going to. We'll let that go for right now.
Yeah, it's just not true.
Yeah. Caleb, Eric, do you want to go, Eric?
No, go ahead, Caleb.
Yeah, I had a couple things on that. First of all, I think going back to something I don't think people defend enough is when people simply say things like, well, Paul is our earliest source, Mark comes later. I think that's a very rudimentary way of seeing it, because although Mark technically, well, I mean, we don't know when it was written. Maybe let's just say 70 AD for the sake of argument is what the mainstream scholarship says. Even then, the majority of scholars think that certainly Mark had earlier sources. Pre-Mark and Passion story is the one that comes to the most. And there's a lot of
or the Q document.
The story is actually extremely critical, probably even more.
Which they don't believe in. But.
No.
I won't go into all the
I don't know either, but that's
right.
Yeah, I'm still working on my feelings towards it. I haven't read Mark Goodacre's book, The Case Against Q, yet. I want to get around to it, but
right, yeah. Oh shoot, why am I drawing a blank on his name? Goodacre, Mark Goodacre, dispensing with Q.
Yeah, he apparently has pretty strong
oh yeah.
I think Ehrman has responded to that book, and he said, "I'm not convinced, but these are really good arguments." So, which is high praise coming from Ehrman,
Right, because when he gets a position, he sticks to it.
Yeah,
that's true.
Back, I think, in 2018, 2019, called The Ending of the Pre-Mark and Passion Narrative. And he argues, among other scholars, that this story is actually very primitive, and for a couple reasons, that there's a lot of Aramaic Semitisms that make it very simple, but there's also a lot of, it's actually less embellished than Paul's account. Paul mentions the scriptures. He says, according to the scriptures, he has titles like Lord. Mark 16 doesn't have any of this.
Did you just say Mark's account is less embellished than Paul's?
Yes.
This is one of those things that's painful to hear.
I was gonna say, did we miss this yesterday? I feel like we just glimpsed over this one, but now
I'm almost willing to bet that he holds to the
traditional authorship.
No, to the long ending of
we
Mark
know about the
being
traditional
original.
authorship.
Oh, you mean the last?
He does. He says it later.
The last 12
okay.
verses.
Yeah. Go figure.
Even better, I think Bram likes to argue that John is the most accurate out of all of the writings in the New Testament. It actually was written by an eyewitness.
Then the other three were.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how he defends that, because that's
the only eyewitness is the one who waited the longest to write it.
Yeah, and he would have been dead by the time, like any eyewitness. He'd been 90 years old. You don't live to be 90.
He would have been old enough that his eyewitness account would not be worth anything more than just very cursory anecdotal evidence, but you wouldn't be able to take it at word for word value for sure. But I'm gonna have to get out of here, guys. My neighbor is kicking me off. I don't have service at my house, but I appreciate you guys letting me on.
Well, thanks so much for coming on, Dr. Jim. I'd love to do a show with you sometimes on Daniel. I've actually been digging into that lately.
Yeah,
man, absolutely. Daniel's my jam. Just hit me up whenever.
Fascinating.
All right. Talk later,
All right.
Jim.
All right, y'all have a great night.
And then there were two.
We're losing the brains of this operation, Matt.
I know. It's
Like,
okay.
first
We still
Pat
have
left
notes.
us, now Dr. Jim left us. Like, it's just you and me now.
Pat's around. He's just having technically difficulties.
Somebody pray for him so we can get him back in here.
Yeah. We have a lot of Christians in the chat.
Yeah.
It's very theologically unembellished in comparison, and so there's for this reason, and there's women witnesses, whereas First Corinthians has Peter be the first one. So for many reasons, there seems to be indications that this actually is a very, very early narrative, probably even earlier than Paul's. So I think people could even contest that.
Yeah, and those are very baseless claims.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are just assertions. It hurts. It hurts.
This narrative is in fact later than Paul's writings. But even going back to the reference to Genesis,
it's hard to see Christian apologists who seem like they've done their homework. They seem really well read and articulate, and then they say something that's just way off, and like you're going to disagree with pretty much every New Testament scholar in the world on
We
this.
need to go back through at some point and just grab the clips where they're hitting the nail on the head, but then moving on.
Yeah, they do that.
They do that at least 3 times, if not 4 times. We've definitely hit one, but they do it quite a few more times as we go on.
Like, just come on, your bias is so apparent right now. Do better.
I think this is just an example of parallelomania. And the issue is that so many different scholars can't agree on what it's a reference to, and they're saying different things. Carrier thinks that it's, among other things, that it's a reference to Psalm 24. He also thinks that in Matthew's version of it, it's a reference to Daniel in the lion's den. Dennis McDonald thinks it's a reference to Homer being buried and mourned by women, among other things. And Dale Allison, in his book on the resurrection, I think,
I'm gonna skip forward.
This, in fact, he actually gives an example from.
Now he is a rich man, and he had become a disciple of Jesus, not a member of the council anymore. Again, asks Pilate for the body of Jesus, and he places it in his own tomb that he had built for himself. Moving on to Luke's account. Now he's a member of the council again, like it was in Mark, and he's just a really great guy. Asks Pilate for the body of Jesus, and just places him in an empty tomb where nobody's been laid yet. Remember Matthew, he was rich, and he buried Jesus in his own tomb. Now it doesn't say he's rich, and he buries him in just a generic tomb. Now, John's account is the most interesting. Lots more details now. Now he's a disciple of Jesus again, but in secret. He was a member of the council, and then he was a disciple of Jesus, and he was a member of the council again, and now he's a disciple of Jesus again, but secretly. And now he's accompanied by a man named Nicodemus. Where the did he come from?
I still love
goes
that.
into detail about Jewish burial customs, likely because this is
It's a
not the
great use
gospel.
of the Bible.
John trying to correct us. At the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden. No mention of a garden anywhere else, but now there is one. And there was a random tomb that no one had ever been laid there before, and so it was nearby, and they laid Jesus there. So now I can see how different, inconsistent, and even contradictory the accounts of the Gospels are, and how much different they are from anything Paul had ever said about them. Now, I did this chronologically, so
do you want me to keep going before we stop, or?
No, I think that's probably a good stopping point.
Okay.
Honestly, I'm really glad that he read the text, because I think
should try it sometime.
There really are no contradictions here. Yeah. There's differences. So, but are these necessarily contradictions? So, I mean, let's go over it again real quick. I got some bullet points here. Matthew says that Joseph was a disciple of Jesus, while Mark and Luke, they don't say this, right? Matthew doesn't mention that Joseph was a member of the council or that he was looking for the kingdom of God. These are mentioned in Mark and in Luke, right? Mark alone says that Joseph took courage. Luke keeps the highest praise of any of the Gospels on Joseph. He calls him a good and righteous man, right? Unlike the other Gospels, Luke is quick to mention that Joseph of Arimathea didn't agree to the council's decision. He doesn't provide any details. Is he suggesting that there was a nighttime meeting and Joseph didn't show up? Or does Luke believe that Joseph stood up for Jesus and was he just like outvoted? Or did Luke hear that Joseph didn't play a part in Jesus's condemnation? We're not told, right? But it's there. John alone mentions Joseph's previous secret discipleship and the involvement of Nicodemus. And Matthew is the only account that tells us that Joseph was rich. Luke and John tell us that the tomb hadn't been used before, and John is the only one who tells us that the tomb was in a garden and nearby the place of crucifixion. So obviously there are some differences here, but is that exactly the same thing as a disagreement? I mean, this.
Yes.
Yes.
Moving on.
This is right out of the Bart Ehrman.
But hold on, what?
Playbook, right? You take differences and you treat them as if they're completely contradictory, and they're.
That's because it is. Here's the problem. Here's what they're doing here. The Gospels are 4 separate accounts to 4 separate audiences, written at 4 different times, different areas. They were never meant to be this. I've said this over and over again. They were never meant to be put in a book together and reconciled with one another. They were never meant to do that. So what they're doing here is exactly that. You don't have to reconcile them with one another. They weren't supposed to be in the first place. That's something that Christians started doing later. It drives me crazy when they're not separate accounts. They're the same account, just with different perspectives. They don't actually contradict each other, even though
it drives me nuts when people can't see that even if they're saying, even if it's not a yes/no statement, if it's a yes and a maybe yes, those are also contradictions. Like just basic changes in their own discrepancies of what they see. So yeah. If they're trying to say like, oh, maybe is also a yes, then sorry, that does bother me. Like saying maybe is not the same.
Yeah.
There are disagreements. But the stories of the burial use different words, they provide different details, they name some different people, and they emphasize different things, but that's not the same as a contradiction.
Yeah.
And so if we read these texts realistically, we realize that there is almost always going to be some variation in the way that any 4 honest writers describe the same event, right?
That is claiming that they're honest. Sorry.
Yeah, no. Yeah,
Which
you're assuming these are honest authors. How do you know that?
Okay, no, go on.
We have no idea who they were.
I'm just go on.
And so I think that the different
trying to be good. I'm trying to be good.
Me too.
Joseph of Arimathea in the 4 Gospels provide really, rather than the problem that Captain Deadpool is saying, I think it gives us an opportunity to see the relationship among the Gospels is not one of.
There is no relationship between the Gospels. They are 4 separate accounts. All right.
Yep.
It's going to be. How do you get that out?
They are different people. Supposed to be.
But all those facts that I read don't seem to really support an embellishment pattern. Like,
I never said they were an embellishment pattern. Love you. Wifey's going to bed. Yeah.
Are you debating if you want
to like not say that he's a really great guy, but then Luke goes out of his way to say that he was a really great guy, and John is kind of like, hey, he's coming in secret. He was actually scared. John kind of puts him down a little bit.
Yeah.
Whereas Mark makes him look like, yeah, he got some stones about himself and decided to ask, and it's just kind of weird. And so I don't think that they show embellishment. I don't think there's a really.
No one said that we thought that they showed embellishment.
I don't think they're. Yeah.
You're arguing with your own contradictions there, sir. Your own opinions.
Human testimonies, and in their accounts, the different gospel writers show independence of judgment and detail, and I think that they actually complement each other quite nicely. There's actually a couple.
They complement each other. Then why is in Matthew's account the tomb belongs to Joseph of Arimathea, but then in Luke and John, it's just a random tomb, or is it Mark and John? It's just a random tomb, doesn't belong to anybody. And John he just finds it. It just happens to be there, which would actually be more accurate.
Yeah.
But anyway,
a couple of different ways that I could show that. Might take me a few minutes to unpack. So I'm gonna turn it to you guys real quick if you want to jump in with anything before I talk about a couple of those things, because I think the different details actually show that this is based more on eyewitness testimony.
Different details are evidence that it's based on reliable eyewitness testimony. That's what you're going with. You're gonna buy that a drink. You're gonna take it out. You're gonna show it a good time.
I have to argue that he's both right and wrong.
Okay.
Simply because one of the things you look for when it comes to just talking to anyone, not every person will tell the same story the same way, but there will be details that each of them will get that will be identical. What we see here are 4 people telling a similar story with details that do not match up.
Right.
And that is why he's wrong versus being right. Because when it comes to eyewitness testimonies, we do expect to hear a bit of a discrepancy between the story, like timeline, et cetera. But like details like he was buried in this rich guy's tomb. Yeah. As soon as you hear rich guy, you're going to have that logged in your brain. And if these other guys are like, nah, he was in an empty tomb, that doesn't make sense.
If you imagine this is like a court witness testimony,
that's
you're interviewing 4 different people, and they all agree there's a Joseph of Arimathea, okay, and he got the body from Pilate. Maybe that's true, but then there's all these different details. Well, those, you're not going to assume they're all saying the same thing, just from a different perspective.
Right.
You're going to say there's problems here.
Right.
That we can't reconcile with one another, unlike the facts that you all agree on. Which, even if it's a fact that they all agree on, that doesn't mean it's reliable either. Again, if you're a lawyer, you know this.
Yeah.
Eyewitness testimony is not always reliable, even from multiple people.
No, it's absolutely, eyewitness testimonies are, I think my favorite quote was from Sherlock, where he starts freaking out. I don't know if you ever saw Sherlock.
No.
But he starts freaking out because John just witnessed something, and he's like, okay, eyewitness testimonies are only 20% accurate. please remember everything. He's like freaking out. Anyway, moving on.
Inside joke with yourself. It's all good.
It's fine. I'm just nerding.
You get one of those per show.
Versus the hypothesis that this is just something invented because somebody read Genesis and it just got carried from there.
One of the big things that I just noticed about this clip was he mentions one of the gospels saying he was rich, and then in the other gospels, one of the other gospels said something different and acted like, well, which one is it? Is he rich, or is he a member of the Sanhedrin? And it's kind of like, well,
right.
I don't see the tension there. So
right.
But
yeah, so I'll jump in here real quick. So as I already said, Mark tells us that Joseph took courage when he asked Pilate for the corpse, right? And as a member of the Sanhedrin, this makes sense because Jesus was crucified for blasphemy. So Joseph was really sticking his neck out. Mark's account is more sympathetic towards Joseph. It says that he was looking for the kingdom of God. But why exactly would a council member be so bold to ask for Jesus's body? Well, for that, if we actually look at John, he seems to fill us in the details that are left out by Mark, but he does it in a really casual and undesigned way that is really unlikely to be the result of him just copying from the other gospels.
So it's
John
not undesigned.
Joseph's lack of overall boldness, and that he was a disciple, but he was a secret one, right? And this portrayal of Joseph is much more negative than Mark's. Joseph finally gets, like I said, the cojones to make his discipleship known, but it's only after Jesus' death. And this was the first time that Joseph had openly shown any sympathy for Jesus. So to emphasize this point, John states that Joseph was joined in the burial by Nicodemus, who had previously come by night to John in the famous passage, John chapter 3. Probably this was out of a shared fear, right? And so here we have 2 reporters who give the same facts at a different angle in their respective accounts. And the emergence of Nicodemus isn't just a wild Nicodemus appears. I'm almost going to do the Bill Cosby Pokemon rap there, but I'll restrain myself. No, I think it actually makes Pokemon. Sorry, I just popped out there.
I have no idea what's going on right now.
Oh, they're just.
This is the best argument right here I've heard so far tonight. Whatever's happening right now.
I was gonna say there's
Like-
nothing we can say because they're actually making a decent argument and adding Pokemon in.
Yeah, they are confusing. If the goal is to confuse me, mission accomplished.
Yeah.
Pokemon Bill Cosby
Distractions.
makes just about as much sense as the other argument. I'm kidding. I'm being mean.
Church Father basically says that Peter was the chief eyewitness source for much of Mark's gospel, right? Then you can imagine that Peter wouldn't be too tough on somebody who is scared at first, but later take courage.
Again, how do we know that?
I would like a source.
It's possible, but how do we know this comes from Peter's testimony?
So I like to think that I take if you can find me a source, I'll believe what you say.
Yeah.
A
Otherwise,
decent source. A
just
reliable
pausing the time.
source.
Now it's likely Peter did have a big role in the transport of oral tradition.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about if you want to make assumptions, yeah, you can. If you want to deduct that from his storyline, that would make sense. But at the same time, we can't prove that definitively. So
yeah, it's just possible, and
right.
we really can't give it any more credence than that.
I hate statistics and probability.
Right?
It just doesn't give
so if John
doesn't give you any liberty.
Right.
John, we know he never denied Jesus. He'd be much less motivated to mercifully put Joseph in a good light. According to John's gospel, he's kind of the goody two-shoes. He's the beloved disciple. He's the type of guy that was so dedicated that he would always make you look bad. There was always that kid in the youth group. I don't know if you guys remember those days or not, but he even followed Jesus all the way to the cross, for crying out loud. And so the point that I'm making here is that the gospel's different treatment of Joseph of Arimathea shows their independence of perspective and to some degree, their independence of information in a way that's just extremely casual.
This argument that they're talking about now, I mean, they stay on this for a really good chunk of time, and honestly, it is a decent argument to discuss. I mean, I didn't have any issues with it, except for the fact that they would come across it, approach the point at which we are trying to make an argument, and then dismiss it entirely. And that was where I was like, they're hitting the nail on the head, and then they're walking away every time. So, so it's bothersome to me in this sense. And I mean, honestly, if you guys want to, you can go back and watch it. But if we want to skip ahead, I think we can. To one of our next points, just because for timing wise, it would make sense.
Yeah, we're pushing 2 hours now when we're only halfway through.
Well, we are only halfway through, but it's towards the end. They kind of generalize a lot of the arguments and rephrase.
Yeah, we can
what they
speed
said
up
before,
a lot more.
so we
at
can
this
jump
point.
through those a little faster.
Yeah.
Well, I think the evidence from John's gospel and from the patristic writers shows that John, when he was writing his gospel, he had a supplementary function for the gospel in mind. In other words, he knew the synoptic traditions. At least he definitely knew Mark, which Richard Balcom has argued in a really important essay called John for Readers of Mark, if you want to check that out. But, chapter 3, verse 24, chapter 11, verse 2 show that. If you want to check out those references, you'll see what I mean if you read it, but I don't have time to go into that right now. But anyway, so
it's hard to know whether John had access to Matthew or any of the other Gospels, because only John only shares about 5% of the same information in the other Gospels. Like it's 95% unique. It's one of the reasons we know it's the least reliable and most embellished. So I don't know.
This is where I lean on you, man. This is the information that I don't retain. It's this is where I listen for sources, and I'm constantly looking for outside sources to confirm what they're saying in this. But this is your dude. Like, have at it.
It seems like John probably did have access to at least one of the Gospels, but he used it as like a skeleton, maybe to make his gospel.
Is this where we started talking about ghost riders yesterday?
Was it?
I feel like it was, but it might not be. We can move on from that then.
Yeah, let's give it.
John knows at least some of these synoptic traditions, and he is intentionally supplementing his gospel, providing information that is not.
Hey, Pat's back.
Pat!
Let me check my mic. Does it work?
It's working.
Yes.
Right.
Wonderful. I
No,
love it.
You don't want to know.
Oh, I don't want to know what you had to do, what sacrifices you had to make it work. Do I need to start blessing a pagan god before we start this up again?
Oh man,
wasn't pretty. That's all I'm gonna say. I had to shut my complete system down, take out my mic, plug my mic back in, and let it find it again. So,
oh jeez.
I was using my phone in Discord, so.
I super appreciate you doing all that so you could jump back in here.
I do too. It's always nice having someone that's a little more professional than myself.
Roman Palestine's not my area of specialties.
It's not mine either.
I don't even have a specialty.
You want to talk about?
I'm a theologian. That's
dead
what
Christian martyrs in the Black Sea. I'm your guy. You want to talk about pre-Christian burials in the Western Black Sea? I'm your guy.
Yeah.
Well, we're kind of going through where they're hitting. I don't know if you've been following along, but we're at the point where they're hitting the arguments on the head. And
was there anything you wanted to go back and discuss?
I just think literacy rates, like,
right.
Again, I pointed some stuff in the chat where I could. Like, this isn't really that hotly contested. Like, the literacy rates in Palestine were pretty bad. Even as typically when we talk about Greco-Roman societies, we're kind of, that's kind of hedging your bets where you're gonna what you're gonna call Greco-Roman, what you're gonna call mixed provincial. There's lots of caveats, but scholarship, the best scholarship out there that seems to be the most robust, is never going to put the literacy rate in the Roman Empire. And we're talking functional. We're not talking high functional literacy rate like what we consider today. We're talking nominally functional, right? Which people go, well, a little bit more than that, but not much, right?
Yeah.
So can read an inscription, maybe not really be able to write it, right? Maybe know how to write a few words. That's the minimum. Like, that's what we consider literate in the Greco-Roman context. And even then they won't put it above 10. And that's the upper end of the estimation in the scholarship. Most people fall somewhere between 5 and 10%. In some places, people go, well, in this region, the lack of epigraphy, remaining records, it might have been much lower, like, half that, like 2.5-3%.
But it's such a weird hill for them to try to die on, that the literacy rate is higher than most people think. Because one, like you said, the general scholarship is not on their side with this, and they have very little to gain from this argument. Like, okay, maybe say you're right and all the scholars are wrong, and their literacy rate was a little bit higher than we think it is. That doesn't add very much credence to your argument. That's not an argument that the Gospels are reliable. Like it's such a tall hill to die on for such a low reward.
Well, and I've always found it kind of odd, because if literacy rates are low, then at least the scribal class is proficient, right? People would be using scribes to write things, right? Like, so you would hope that there would be this tradition, like, if people couldn't read and write, they wouldn't try to wing it, right? Like, I know it's, and I don't like to use this analogy, but if I was poorly educated and wrote at a 5th grade level, and it was okay to go around writing at a 5th grade level, right? That's how everything would turn out. But in the Greek and Roman world, when you had to write a letter, right, and you weren't literate, or you were not very literate, or you could read a little bit, you went to someone who knew how to do it. Right. And so
you go to a scribe who would,
you would pay
write
someone,
the letter for you.
Right. So that there was this need for this educated class of people that could do what people couldn't do. And that Roman Palestine appeared to be no exception. And we do know that, like, again, I put her name up in the chat, but Catherine Hertzer, she's kind of, that's like her specialty is Roman Palestine. She's, you don't get to be the editor on the Oxford Handbook to Jewish Life in Roman Palestine because you're an idiot, right?
Well, Catherine Hertzer. Was it Catherine Hertzer? Yeah.
Hertzner. Yeah.
Yeah, Hertzner.
Yeah, she's the one that wrote this article on literacy rates, and her commentary was, when we look at among Jewish aristocracy, they seem to be lower than their Greek and Roman counterparts, which means that this is problematic. Like, even the rich people who should be able to read and write at higher rates, Jewish aristocrats seem to be reading at lower rates than their Greek and Roman counterparts. Like, they're less literate. And if you follow that down into societies in general, that means that probably Jewish people were less literate than their Greek and Roman contemporaries. The one issue that we have is there's this cultural, whether or not it's a fiction or not, the fact that, well, Jews of the ancient world relied so much on both the Torah and the Tanakh that every Jew could read. Like, there's actually apologetics. There's apologetics to this effect.
Yeah.
No, because of their society forcing this system, then every man had to be able to do this, and every woman had to be able to do this, right? Or this or that. And that just does not hold up. You can learn enough through rote memorization. And people go, well, see, they could read, they can memorize. No, that's a modern thing. You can memorize by someone telling you something and then you repeating it. I can teach you to memorize by you hearing a story over and over and over again until you're proficient in reciting it.
That's
and
fair.
A lot of the anachronism that's projected backwards into Jewish culture is from a modern perspective, where it's like, oh man, and I hate to say it, but like, every guy goes, well, I know this rabbi, and he's memorized every verse of the Torah. Well, right. But that doesn't mean that everybody that he comes in contact with memorizes it either. And it doesn't mean that his counterpart 1,000 years ago had memorized the whole thing. He may have memorized it, but not from a written source. You can memorize, commit something to memory without being able to read, because someone else taught you it was an oral memorization rather than a auditory memorization instead of a visual memorization, right? Memorizing the text, committing it to memory. There's different ways to do it. And it appears that, the assertion that ancient Hebrews were much higher rates of literacy seems to not be borne out in the historical record at all. And if anything, they were a little less literate than their Greek and Roman counterparts in Palestine.
Well, so that hopefully that settles the argument that's been going on in the chat for like the whole of this entire debate. But we're also going to watch these four talk about the literacy rates in the next 10 minutes or so.
Sure.
Let's see.
In the synoptics, but doing so intentionally, right? And so it's not a surprise that he mentions details and people that just aren't emphasized in the synoptic traditions, which have more of a focus on Peter, right? Also, John is very up close to the facts, in my view, which is why he mentions all these details. Like in John chapter 6, when Jesus is walking on the water, he says that, we had traveled, he doesn't use we, but
you wanted to say we. That's
he wanted to.
You wanted to say we.
Do you see his little face? Do you see a little smile?
Yeah, he really wanted to say we, but it doesn't. Sorry, it doesn't.
I think he was the author of the gospel, so I'm just saying that.
Yeah. Because he thinks John's the author. If John was the author of the gospel, he would have said we
instead of they.
But sorry. That's not how you do that.
And he uses numerical details and details of place, more so than the synoptic. So I don't think the presence of Nicodemus is actually very surprising in this view.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I like to talk about, especially when it comes to John. Because a lot of people like to say that John is more theologically inspired and all this other stuff, but
it is.
John has a lot of details in his gospel that's kind of points the other direction. He's very like the high, how Dr. Lid.
Now I will grant. What's that?
We. Sorry.
I will grant them that that John gets some things more accurately. Like he gets some of the geographic locations. Like he seems to correct some of the geographic locations. The burial ritual by Joseph Arimathea. He corrects a lot of details about that. But it's not evidence that it's closer to an eyewitness. It's evidence that the author was more educated and knew where the authors of the synoptics fucked up.
Right, and was engaging in some level of apologetics to say, no, this is how it was done. Whether or not it was to correct the historical record or to say, no, there were problems with these other texts. There's something going on there that was causing that to happen. And I would say that the two things, more information and additional higher levels of theology, aren't mutually exclusive. They actually reinforce each other. Like they're actually giving you benefit of your argument and they don't realize they're doing it.
No, yeah, this is exactly, this is where I'm like, they keep approaching the point that we're trying to make and yet somehow defer it to being ridiculous and moving on.
Well, how much longer is John than it's the longest one? I can't remember. This is the part I forget.
John's somewhere between Mark and Matthew in length.
Right.
Luke is the longest. Mark is the shortest.
But John's is the kind of middle, right? As far as word count type.
Somewhere in the middle.
Right.
Just 1 second and I'll tell you. John is 21 chapters long. By comparison, Matthew is 28 chapters long. So yeah, it's longer than Mark, shorter than Matthew and Luke.
Yeah, so it's kind of in the middle. So you'd expect some details to be in there that aren't in other things.
Yeah,
that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, John also leaves out like huge chunks of the stories in order to make room
for the other stuff. Right.
Yeah.
William likes to say he's very empirical. He likes to point to a lot of specific details and get a lot of facts together rather than just kind of make a generalized statement, right?
Yeah. And B.F. Westcott, if y'all ever get a chance, you can download B.F. Westcott's commentary on John for free on the internet because it's in the public domain now. And I suggest reading.
Are you familiar with that, Pat?
I'm familiar with it in generalizations, but I'm gonna go ahead, keep going.
Yeah.
The first little section he has on the internal evidence for John's gospel, and he has an excellent treatment of John's love for authentic eyewitness detail.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I was right. Westcott died in 1900.
Yeah,
like that's why it's public domain, and the reason
it's like 1909.
This is another one of those sources I was talking about.
Right,
how
like
it's like
the source is over 100 years old. Like, sure, you got a theologian writing a defense, and it's free, and you can read it. Well, right, like, well, spend the $200 to get the Cambridge abridged 8 to 10 volume series on all the scholarship that's been done in the last 50 years, right? Like read the 5,000 to 10,000 pages of modern biblical scholarship, not the stuff that was done 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, it's not outdated. It's still a very influential essay.
You want to give me the link to that after this, Bram, and I can put that in the description as well.
Yes, give him the link to the 100-year-old source.
Anything else, guys?
No, I was just going to say people need to know what a contradiction is because I think as everyone's...
You need to know what a contradiction is. Anyway, I'm resorting to
Are you resorting
playground
to
apologetics right here? Like, no,
We're
your
resorting
mom.
to pettiness now.
It's not mutually. You could say that Fan is a husband, a weightlifter, and a podcaster, and those are different, but they're not necessarily a contradiction. A contradiction would be things that are mutually exclusive, like a square circle or an honest politician.
It hurts.
Second one's a joke.
It does a little. It does.
I don't see it that as being an issue at all to say that a Pharisee is rich. That's entailed. It actually be more surprising if he wasn't.
You would more predict, you would kind of predict that a Pharisee would be.
The contradiction is more in Did he own the tomb? Was it his? Did he buy it for himself? Or was it a random tomb that just happened to be there? That's a contradiction. You cannot reconcile those two.
Thing or situation in which inconsistent elements are present. Contradiction.
Beautiful. Right.
Cool.
Oh, it's me again.
See how the story evolved and was embellished over time. And if you keep going and start looking into the Gnostic Gospels, they get embellished even further to the point where Jesus resurrects as like a 1,000-foot angel. So you want to go back as far as you can to get a better idea of where these stories started. And in this case, the earliest accounts we have are Paul and the scriptures that he had access to, none of which mention an empty tomb. They do mention Jesus being resurrected and appearing to his disciples, but it's not a resurrection that would necessarily require an empty tomb. I have another tangent I want to go off on about this, so I'm going to go ahead and do a part 3, but I'll probably do that later. But for now, hope that helps. All right.
Do you guys want to say anything about his point on Gnostic Gospels before we go?
Can I just say that I'm confused as to what, because earlier I agreed with him on his view of the resurrection body, but if he's saying Paul didn't necessarily believe that the tomb would have been empty, I'm kind of confused.
Yeah, we covered this earlier. Paul's idea of a resurrection would not have required an empty tomb.
Nope.
Like based on, Second Temple Judeo beliefs about resurrection. That's where Paul's ideas came from. He was a Pharisee. His ideas about resurrection come straight from Daniel. So yeah. Anyway,
What is trying to say. I think. Yeah. Well, I think his overall point here is that nobody really knew what they believed. Like the central, or original Christian belief in the resurrection wasn't as concrete as what Christians today might think, because you have different sources saying different things, like the Gnostic Gospels, and he's trying to make the argument, I think, that over time you can.
Part 3 of the tomb and resurrection. The first is important to remember that after Jesus' death, they didn't have anything to go off of, at least not at first. So what happened was stories began to circulate well before anything was written down and then circulated. Stories spread much faster than scripture. Now, only about 3-ish% of the population was literate at the time. So by the time they got to someone who could actually write them down, you can imagine how much change.
Which was a low estimate.
Even once we started getting
no, actually, that's
New Testament.
nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's just 3 to 5. I mean, so again, it'd be different if you were trying to say that, but
I said 3-ish. So
right. He falls within the category of within the range that's acceptable. Right. So that's not a problem.
Okay. It's not like you're fully out of there.
Cool. I'll keep it
300 years later. And the Gospels we use now are only 4 of 44. And there were way more epistles than that, many of which were claiming to be written by Paul. The picture I'm trying to paint here is that people didn't know what to believe. Some groups seem to believe that Jesus ascended to heaven straight from the cross. Some became Docetists, who believed that Jesus was entirely a spiritual being. The Samaritans believed that Jesus had a twin brother, and that's who they saw after Jesus was crucified. Some groups came up with their own gospels. Some groups used a version of the gospels that we have that was a little bit different. The Ebionites used a version of Matthew's gospel that didn't have the first 2 chapters, so they didn't believe in the virgin birth. The Marcionites used a version of Luke's gospel, and they believed that the God of the Old Testament was a completely different God from the God of the New Testament, who Jesus represented. Different Gnostic groups started popping up, and they believed all kinds of other things. Christians today have different theologies, different doctrines, different ways they think church services should be held, but they all pretty much universally agree on the resurrection of Jesus. There is a reason for that. That is by design. But among early Christian groups, there was no such agreement or consistency. The version of Christianity that we have today is the one that won out in the end back then. They were the most successful in their proselytizing, and they fancied themselves Orthodox, and everyone else were heretics. They had heresy hunters that would actually go out and spread rumors about these other Christian groups. We have records of this. This group over here performs child sacrifices, even though that wasn't true. This group over here, they have very graphically described orgies, even though that wasn't true. History is determined by the winner, not the most truthful. Modern day Christianity is a very good example of that. But let's say, for sake of argument, that there was.
All right, he's going to go. He's changing subjects after this. Do you guys want to say anything?
Oh, man. What did he open up to? What? Yeah, where did he begin?
There's a lot to unpack there, isn't there?
A lot of information you just threw at him.
No, before that.
He was talking about how the oral tradition spread and it got all probably mixed up before anybody wrote anything down and all that other kind of stuff.
I think we should
Kind of the point that I was trying to make before we watch.
Oh, is this where they go on? Yeah.
Yeah.
Does anybody want to talk about oral tradition?
We just discussed this. Kind of jumped ahead beforehand, so we can probably jump ahead again because Pat just nailed the hammer on the head when it comes to oral traditions and being able to be literate.
Well,
this is the literacy part.
The other thing I want to go back. I mean, so I'm not here to. I actually think Bram's very respectful. He never, but I've had a conversation with him before. Like he's talking about John, and I keep hearing because I watched this video with you guys. Like he's talking about historical reliability, right?
Mm-hmm.
One thing we're not talking about is detected corruptions and interpolations. John's got some problems as a text that's been corrupted, right? Like when you go, hey, I want to use this scholarship from people, Westcott from 100 years ago. Well, Westcott, right? Like these people that were doing analysis in the 18th and 19th century that a lot of Christians want to go back to, they don't even address textual criticism, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're not going to do textual criticism, then why have the argument? Like, why even discuss? Like, do you believe that the account of the woman taken in adultery is correct in the gospel, which we find it?
Mm-hmm.
And if you say yes, then I have to go, well, you're obviously unfamiliar and unsophisticated in the areas of textual criticism because the overwhelming majority of biblical textual critics that aren't theologians disagree with you, right? So again, if we can't have a discussion about major sections of interpolation, like why was there a resurrection account added to Mark?
Yeah. Last 12 verses, I think.
Yeah, but why? Again, it's a corruption, but you want to defend authenticity. How do you get around this without going through and finding every time a scribe turned the word Jesus, because it just said Jesus, added Christ after it in order to synchronize the text, because at some places it says Christ, other times it says Jesus, and you as a scribe knows they're talking about the same guy, but you're changing the text to balance your theology. You and I are both fans of Bart Ehrman, but it's not just Ehrman. There's a lot of scholarship out there. To go through and find all these corruptions in texts is highly specialized, highly nuanced, and these guys aren't even engaging in that. They're just saying, we believe John because it's a great source. Really? If it's such a great historical source, how come they added a whole chapter to it? Or it's actually about half a chapter, but whatever.
It's even like New Testament scholars New Testament scholars who are Christian. They're not even having these same arguments. Like they understand the interpolations and the corruptions of the scriptures. They're trying to figure out why those changes were made. Like they're not even arguing with it. And so one example they come up with is like the adoptionism versus anti-adoptionism changes that are made throughout, especially in Luke. When Jesus was a child, they had changed out of was it like 2 or 3 times it says Jesus' mother Mary and his his parents. Jesus' parents were looking
Mary
for
Mary says, "You have left me and your father. Why'd you run away from us?" Right? Like instead of saying, and they changed the text to say, "Why'd you leave me and Joseph?" Right?
Yeah.
That's not what the text said. It said, "Me and your father." Right? Like it was very clear. And the earliest manuscripts, if you follow the manuscript record, show some corruption. Now, as a historian, I can explain why that's happening. Textual scholars can explain why it's happening. But if you're sitting here and you're looking at a late 3rd century, 4th century manuscript versus a 6th century manuscript and wondering why these don't add up, and you're trying to debate someone like you about why you're wrong, then you should really fix your own house and get an argument on why can we even use John as a source at all? Like, in which version of John are you going to use? Right? Like, are you going to use what's known as the textually critiqued translation, where they tear out the stuff they know? And in that case, you're going to need 3 or 4 copies because not everybody agrees, right? And you're going to have to figure it out. But which are you going to just use the King James version because it supports your worldview and it's easy to read?
Yeah. Oh, dude.
Because it's popular, and that's how I want to be seen.
I had some Christians come to my house last week, and they were talking to me about the King James, and I was like, and we talked for like 45 minutes. I told them all about the manuscripts, like P45.
Yeah.
I went through everything, and I was like, if you're a Christian, that's fine, dude, but you got to get rid of that King James. He was King James only. He's like, this is the uncorrupted word of God. I was like, I literally showed him corruptions.
Right.
Like, just get rid of the King James. Just do me that one favor.
I once heard this is a Jesuit New Testament scholar. So he's got some skin in the game as far as his theology. And the exact words were, without a doubt, the King James, the original, is possibly one of the worst translations of the New Testament that's still, particularly the New Testament, because he was a Greek textual specialist. He's like probably one of the worst translations of the New Testament that's currently out there. And again, if you and like he said, if you want to know, go to the original Greek and read it. Like, and not to, I mean, most people don't have that, but like, because the texts are so varied,
Yep. All right. Moving right along.
Who's probably one of the, as far as like in our group, is the one who's read the most on memory. I just want to.
Okay, yeah. So they're talking about oral tradition a lot.
Right.
I don't have any timestamps, so we're just going to experiment a little bit.
John is the author of John, the beloved disciple, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, he mentioned some of the internal evidences, right? I mean,
yeah, they said this earlier about John being the author of John. Dude, this is the problem with Christian apologists. All right, you are having an entirely different conversation that nobody is having. That no one who wants to be taken seriously as a scholar is having. No one is out there arguing that John was written by John and it's the most reliable gospel. There's no scholar out there that would take you seriously if you looked at them in the face and said that. So do better. Like you are having a conversation nobody else is having. It's infuriating.
I mean, I have like tons that I could go through. It would probably make this a much longer video. And we're getting off kind of on a whole different subject here because it starts with empty tomb, and then it just basically he's just kind of poo-pooing the Gospels at this point and saying that they're not eyewitness sources at all. It's just a bunch of oral tradition that was spread and eventually written down. And I would say, absolutely not. That's not the case at all. I think Mark was rooted in a lot of Peter's testimony. I think if you read the book Jesus and the Eyewitnesses by Richard Bauckham, there's a lot of good arguments there that it was rooted in Peter's testimony. I think that there are names of specific people in Mark's gospel, like Rufus and Alexander, that Bauckham talked
issues and debates that were raging in the early church. We don't see Jesus talking, for example, about circumcision. You do see Jesus talking about circumcision in the Gospel of Thomas. You don't see him talking about circumcision in the Gospels.
This is where we were talking about how he's okay taking this little tidbit from the Gospel of Thomas, but he's not okay listening to the other various what do we call them? The forgery Gospels. He doesn't want to listen to those. He'll listen to this one.
Yeah, and he cited Maccabees. He didn't even cite Maccabees.
No.
He cited a word that in the Hebrew looks like it could mean Arimathea in First Maccabees. Like,
okay, sorry. I just wanted to. I got excited again.
Well, just to correct him though, John does mention circumcision.
Does it?
Oh shit!
Yeah, John 7 talks about circumcision being given to Abraham and yada yada yada.
Oh,
I don't quote and memorize, but but at the same time, if we're going to engage in analysis, let's look at the pastorals, which revisit circumcision as a major theme, and they're all 2nd century texts that are now largely accepted by Christians but rejected as being authoritatively written by Paul. So circumcision into the 2nd century is the reason it's an issue, and he's right to point out there's changes in the church, but don't say that circumcision isn't mentioned in the Gospels, because at least in John they're talking about it being the covenant of Abraham.
And Jesus' circumcision is mentioned in Luke, and the end of Luke 1 and beginning of Luke 2, I think. It's like Jesus' own circumcision is in the story.
In John, he's saying that's the reason you circumcise your kids. Like, I think that's the verse roughly, because it was given to Moses. That's why Jews do it, right? Like,
yeah.
But it's mentioned, so don't say it's not mentioned. It was mentioned in the Gospels.
Put words into the mouth of their Lord to have their Jesus address something like circumcision or speaking in tongues, etc. So yeah, there's a lot that can be said about oral tradition, but my point is that there are a lot of very good arguments for a controlled oral tradition, and so it's not very fair of Dadpool to just assume this very loose view of oral tradition.
I have you about that, Pat. Controlled oral tradition. Like, do you think that's because I hear this argument all the time? Were they like?
They may have been like. So, how much cultural corruption were allowed in these texts? You can say, I mean, again, there are highly conservative cultures that certain Mesoamerican and indigenous people of North America have some pretty conservative cultural traditions as far as the projection of oral tradition. Some cultures seem to have approached it a little looser, particularly if they have a tradition that's there's not as much theology tied to it. But to say that it's perfect, again, it's how much variance is allowed within the tradition is really the argument they should be having, not that Judaism doesn't allow for corruption. My question is Bram, well, how much corruption are you willing to allow within the oral tradition? Not if you say it didn't happen, then we can have that debate all day, and I'll show you mountains of scholarship. But what the debate in academia is how much corruption happens within oral tradition, and we don't know, because the problem is at a certain point, the oral Torah is going to be conserved in a written form, and once it's codified, the Torah and then later the Tanakh are written down, then you always have something to go back to, so a learned caste can teach the others through oral tradition, right? But until that entire codification happens, you can't say how corrupt it is, because they're writing stuff down. Like we know that like the book of Daniel is formed over like probably a century-long period.
Yeah.
Right. How much of the earlier part was affected by later oral tradition, we don't know. But by the mid 2nd century BCE, we have it written down, but we don't know how much of it. Again, Daniel was probably manufactured. That's probably not a very good argument. But other books, how much corruption happened up to that point, right? But once you have it written down, oral corruption is really easy to detect, because you go back to the written source. So, but before it's written down, I would say probably the ancient Israelites were no better than anybody else. But once you have it written down, you can say, no, I can read this, you're saying it wrong, right? So that would be the difference.
Okay.
It's kind of like the Irish skalds, right? A lot of them were illiterate. Some were literate. So when they were like even in the medieval period, like an Irish bard would come to town, or a minstrel, and he'd say something, but he didn't write down the story, so his became a version of a folk story. You get a version of a folk story, and but then the one that we say is the authoritative one is the one's written down. It doesn't mean it's any more authoritative. It's just the one that we know was written, so it was less prone to corruption, right? So
yeah,
not
immune to corruption, less prone,
right?
When they were still clearly corrupted even after they were getting written down.
Correct.
Right.
So how much more was it getting corrupted during the oral phase? Probably worse. Probably more.
Probably more.
Actually, it's almost a certainty that was more corrupted during the oral period. Like just oral transmission is inherently more problematic, because once a text's written down, you can always go back to the text. Once the mistake happens in an oral tradition, that generation dies off, and the mistake is no longer detectable. And unlike a written tradition, right?
Yeah.
Yep. I'm not going to go into that.
With everything that Eric said.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Graham. Didn't mean to jump over there, but basically, a lot of the people, the different groups that he's bringing up, I mean, a lot of them are later groups. This whole idea of the canonical gospels are the gospels that won out. Well, maybe that's based on good reasons.
Yeah.
A lot of these gospels, even the most skeptical of scholars, are going to date far later, whereas the canonical gospels are going to be dated much earlier. The reason why they are quoted by the early church fathers more than anything else is because they were believed to be put in based on apostolic testimony. A lot of these guys, like Polycarp, quotes the New Testament Gospels and a lot of the epistles. You have Clement, you have Ignatius, you have these guys quoting the Gospels, and a lot of early church tradition says that these guys were actually disciples of the apostles. And so, I mean, there's so much that could be said here. Like I said,
Yeah.
it would just be another show, but
It'd be a different video.
yeah, but
Early church fathers in the 3rd, 4th century claiming that the Gospels were written by disciples is not evidence that they were, because the Gospels were written anonymously. Because they're written anonymously, any authorship attached to them it's an assumption that there's no evidence for. They added the names of those authors to make them seem more credible when they were never there in the first place. Luke never claims to have been written by Luke. Luke claims to have gathered all of these stories from various sources to make his gospel.
Well, who are you going to read? Luke, Mark, and Matthew, or are you going to read Anonymous 1, Anonymous 2, and Anonymous 3?
Exactly. Which that's actually probably why they were written anonymously, because if you were someone who was not of any sort of importance and you wrote a book, no one would read it. No one would take it seriously. So it would flop. So a lot of times you would have a better chance of it being successful if you left it anonymous. That's what they did. That's why Paul puts his name on all of his letters, and that's why people pretend to be Paul, because he had so much authority to his name. Yeah. They were willing to take that risk. It was punishable. I forget what the offenses were, or what the punishment was, but it was fraud, and people were willing to take that risk anyway, because Paul's name had so much authority behind it. So,
and the great thing is, it was okay to do it with Christian stuff, because remember, Christianity is not until very later isn't a formal religion accepted by the Roman Empire.
Right.
So you don't have to worry about being charged with, like, you want to get executed in the Roman world, forge a document by the emperor or some prefect or governor or some like good way to get executed, get that found out. But you get caught doing forgery of other things, like saying you're some well-known person. There were social and political and legal ramifications for that as well. But you start forging stuff about some itinerant startup religion the Romans really don't care about and actually consider somewhat by the 2nd and 3rd century as illegal, they're not going to care. It's your sect and your group are going to care. And so,
Yeah. All right.
This whole history, is won by the winners thing. I mean, it's just kind of a meme at this point, that no matter how much people say and push back against it, it's just going to be repeated, asserted strongly a year later, like nobody's ever said anything. I would just encourage people to get both sides of the debate. And there's a lot of different places that you could look.
That's a really interesting thing he just said.
Isn't it?
Right. Like, so let's go look at all of the Gnostic texts written between the late 1st and 4th century. Let's just go look at all of them so we can compare them to see, oh, that's right. We don't have like slews of them because they were destroyed on purpose.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
and just rediscovered 70 years ago.
Once again.
Right. And
close.
But we don't have all of them. Right. And like, in addition, there's a lot of works by some early church fathers who are later declared heretics that we don't have all their works either. Right. Yeah. Because they were just, in like the writings of like, all the people that we know about their Gnostic sects that are in like the various against heresies that all these early church fathers wrote. We don't have the only thing that we know they wrote are when they're quoted, but we don't have their original work. So let's talk about, again, there's a reason historians use that phrase. It's shorthand. Yeah, it can be nuanced at times, but to say I'd have you go look at it. Yeah, go. Other than a few texts that were found at Nag Hammadi, like like we don't have stuff. Like, and we say a few, yeah, it's a lot to us today, but it's very small sliver compared to what was out there in antiquity.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. The only things that we have of these people were deemed heretics are what the enemies wrote about them. That's all we have is what the winners said about the people that they conquered. That's all we have about Martian. They wrote a lot about him. Well, not a lot, but they wrote about him. We don't have anything that he wrote. He was never able to defend himself. Right? None of these guys are able to defend themselves. So huge chunks of history lost because people believed that they were right, and everybody else were possessed by demons and shit. Like that's, yeah.
Charles Hill has a really good book called "Who Chose the Gospels."
Very good.
He also co-authored a book with Michael Kruger and Andreas Kostenberger. I'm probably saying that name wrong. Called "The Heresy of Orthodoxy." That really gets into these matters of history being decided by the winners and who's in and who's out and all that other kind of stuff. And so, if you're really interested in those kind of issues, besides reading Bart Ehrman, read those two books. And they interact a lot with the skeptical views, and I think.
So they mentioned Bart Ehrman a lot, and I got to point this out. Very, very little of anything Bart Ehrman has ever said is new. He packages it he packages it in a way that's a little more palatable for the common reader.
Yeah.
But nothing's new. Like you can find things that he's said in all kinds of other sources.
He gets into like nuanced stuff where he's going, like he's analyzing scholarship and explaining why he weighs in an argument. But first thing I did is after I read Ehrman, I went back and read Metzger, right? And I started going back to see where did Ehrman get this stuff. And then I realized that Ehrman's pretty mainstream, right down the middle of the road. Like he's not out there. And there's some other people that I've gotten that I kind of like some of their stuff a little better, but I just like it better. Doesn't mean it's right.
Oh,
make up your own mind from there.
Yeah. F.F. Bruce's work on the canon is very good as well.
Yeah.
Bruce Metzger's, you're saying?
F.F. Bruce.
Oh, my bad. Okay.
I haven't read Metzger on this issue, but I know that he has written something.
why would you?
Yeah. Well, hey, because this point came up, we should do a streams one day on authorship and all this other stuff. So I think that'd be helpful. But,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I also heard that I forgot if it was Lacona or Craig is doing.
All right.
They keep talking about this for a while.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's a caricature.
Yeah.
People trying to say.
Cool.
There we go.
It couldn't be that the women went to the wrong tomb. That would be absurd. Couldn't be that Jesus actually survived and left on his own. That would be absurd. Couldn't be that Jesus actually died and it was his twin brother that they saw walking around. That would be absurd. Couldn't be that his closest followers all had a bereavement-induced hallucination. That would be absurd. And they would be all pretty wild out there ideas, but they would all be naturalistic explanations as to why the tomb was empty. To say that none of those things could possibly have happened, and thus the resurrection is the most likely answer, is by definition an argument for incredulity. No one has ever.
Okay, so go ahead, Caleb.
No.
Ruffled some feathers with that one.
I think that just misunderstands how inference the best explanation works. So first of all, no one ever said it's impossible that it could possibly happen. Mm-hmm. It's a probability issue, first of all. And it's also the issue of explanatory power, explanatory scope, what best explains it. So while something like the swoon theory technically can explain it, you have to look at prior probability, plausibility, and all the stuff. How much could it explain it? Because it's true. If you say the woman went to the wrong tomb, then although, however ad hoc that is, then you also have to add an additional hypothesis.
He's getting so close.
Which we haven't even brought up in
this
discussion, by the way. And he didn't even bring up
it's one of those times
as far as the appearances. But that's where it's relevant. And it's also the idea that you have to look at there's issues with each one of those. So I think the best one you could appeal to is theft by a third party. But the other ones he mentioned, like Joseph moving the body doesn't really make sense as to why Joseph would leave his tomb and then it open with the stone rolled away to be exposed to animals, and why he'd do this in the middle of the night.
Again, to say that this doesn't make sense, thus God resurrected him from the dead, makes more sense.
Just because you can't, if they're not going to be able to disprove the natural, why even jump to the supernatural?
This is what they're saying. Resurrection was more probable than grave robbing.
Right, and that's never true.
Like grave robbing, which we know happened all the time in the ancient world, and people go, "What do you mean?" Read my book on witchcraft and magic when it comes out in the ancient world.
Just talk to one archaeologist.
Right,
Just
it happens all the time, right?
All the freaking time.
I mean,
all the time.
I could see a bunch. I could see a bunch of drunk Romans going, "Hey, did they put fancy shit in that dead Jew's tomb?" And they went in there and stole his shit, right?
I can fully expect the soldiers to be the robbers,
right? Like
guards or whatever.
Right, exactly. So, like, I don't care, but but to say, oh, it's less probable that Romans would disregard some Jewish guy's tomb and rob it, or just anybody, right? Like it's crazy. And I do want to point out that if I'm like, we'll just talk about, like, I haven't read Bruce Metzger. Metzger wrote over 25 books singularly or with other authors over the course of his lifetime that are all considered like important reading in textual criticism and New Testament studies. He authored several major translations of texts that are still considered authoritative today. And like, if you're unfamiliar with this scholarship, but you've read books by people that I don't have any idea who they are, it's not my field of expertise, but like, you got to wonder, like, have you read the mainstream scholarship?
Yeah, you're reading very fringe, or you're not just reading, relying on very.
You're reading really abstract things. Do you know what the normal argument is before we get into this?
Yeah, I mean, again, but like, someone stealing Jesus' body, like, just imagine today, you and I, me, Nat, and Captain Deadpool are going to a graveyard, right? To go visit a mutual friend we have that was buried a couple weeks ago. And we get there and their grave is open. The casket's on top of the ground and the lid's open. Now, if our go-to is they resurrected versus us calling the police, you think about which one is more tied to reality.
I mean, I would,
because it's the exact same explanative thing. And just so to be fair, this was our really good Christian friend who said that Jesus was going to take him to heaven. So there were declarative statements of possible resurrection prior to their death.
Yeah, but I wouldn't have believed him because I'm not that kind of friend.
I'm just saying that's why a lot of ancient people didn't believe Jesus was resurrected either. There were a lot of Jews standing around in Judea going, yeah, empty tombs still don't believe it. Like, a lot of people were unconvinced. Lots of people. Lots.
Yep.
Yep.
Or, women go to the wrong tomb, that's going to be pretty easily corrected the next day.
Exactly.
So just saying, oh, actually, guys, he's over here.
Yes, it would have been very easily corrected.
The spoon theory, I think Strauss even criticized that 150 years ago, where he said even if you grant all of that, they wouldn't say, "Oh my gosh, Jesus is alive and risen." They would say, "Oh my gosh, let's give him to a doctor." So among all those different points, I think that you don't just say, "Well, the resurrection." You look at these other ones and say, "Well, here's like they lack explanatory power and all this stuff," and that's typically how Bayes works. I don't have to get to complicate Bayes theorem here, but just the idea is that you look at what you predict on your hypothesis and what you would and how surprising it would be if the hypothesis was false. So if Jesus was resurrected bodily, the predictions that there would be an empty tomb is very high. It's actually it's almost one because it's entailed. If it wasn't empty, then it would be incoherent. And so forth. The appearances is also fairly high. Whereas if Jesus did not raise from the dead, the probability that he'd have an empty tomb is not at all very high. It's also even less high that people would see that and so forth. And there'd be conjunction of these things. So that's kind of how you have to think about this. In terms of that.
Yeah, to put it real simply, I mean, when something can be explained without difficulty by supposing a miracle occurred, but not without larger plausibility by assuming that a miracle didn't occur, that's evidence for a miracle. I mean, it's just that simple. And he's
wait, what?
Yeah.
Did I hear that right?
No, you heard it right.
You heard it right.
I'm still mad about that.
Again, grave robbing is less probable than resurrection. That's what he just argued.
And obviously, miracles are more likely, for sure. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Faith healing is more likely than spontaneous remission when it comes to people with cancer.
Personal hot topic there. Anyway, moving on.
He's offering all of these different alternate explanations, but I mean, I kind of want to bring something up as far as resurrection. I mean, there was a lot of first century Palestine people who were Messiah type figures or prophets or miracle workers and different things like that. What happened when those guys died?
They stayed dead.
There was crickets. Like there's nothing, right?
Our Messiah
Yeah, ours rose from the
ours
dead.
is
What did
better
yours
because
do?
he raised from the dead.
Yeah, it's bragging rights.
Picked a hell of a day to stop drinking.
Yeah, no information, right? They just stay. They were
I'm just not
dead,
drinking tonight.
and we don't have any stories of them continuing to have a following really much afterwards.
That's because they are hunted down and killed. That's why they didn't have a follower. That's why Jesus' disciples hid, because they were going to be hunted down and killed too.
I mean, they were literally found hiding.
They sure do like to quote Josephus a lot.
They do. They're
When it's
really
convenient.
leaning into him.
So the Samaritan Jesus is the same Jesus in their story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, whatever.
Yes.
That is a mood. That is a mood.
I'm feeling the dad energy.
Oh. 2nd century when he died, what we found was exactly what we would expect. They lost the following.
Actually, I think I don't remember if this is the citation, but I remember hearing that some of Bar Kokhba's or one of the prelates actually their disciples abandoned them and denied knowing them because so they wouldn't get executed. So just that parallel. Yeah, but you know what I was
kind of like
certain guy.
Yeah, certain guy. And Pliny the Younger tortured all these Christians, and then they denied, no, we're not Christians. Just kidding. Yeah, I'll sacrifice, or I'll give a burnt offering to Rome's god. Sure.
You're a witch. No,
Yeah.
I'm not.
Oh,
Well, we'll just start ripping your fingernails off. Oh yeah,
Jesus,
no, I'm a
who?
witch.
I don't know. Yeah.
Like, just kidding. I'm a witch. Okay, save me.
I like how Wright parodies that, where he says, like, let's imagine one of Bar Kokhba's followers after he got executed saying, well, I've been praying and I really feel his presence. I think I've had a vision. I think he's still with us. They wouldn't say, oh, hallelujah, he's risen. They would say, go sing a psalm, go sing a hymn. We know the Romans got him. Yes, of course he'll be raised eventually at the resurrection, but clearly he wasn't the Messiah. He may be up in heaven as a soul, but the Messiah's supposed to be here on earth. So we could go find someone else. So that's
If I ever raised from the dead, nobody sing to me. Nobody.
Nope.
You weren't finished. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, just super quick. I mean, what occupies the most probability space when somebody dies, even a Messiah figure, even a prophet, even a supposed miracle worker? The thing that fills the most probability space is nothing.
Yep.
No visions, no hallucinations, no conversion disorders, no stories of empty tombs, no stolen bodies. The things that he's describing already have extremely low probability built into them.
But it's higher than a supernatural event. Come on.
Yeah, that's basically the point that I'm trying to make. And so unless he just wants to say that no amount of evidence could possibly give us any sort of that could serve as evidence for a miracle, then he really can't make that argument. I really like this quote by Tim McGrew, and I'll throw it back to you, Bram. He says that any initial prejudice against miracles, any ground for the assignment of an initial low probability to the claim that a miracle has occurred, cannot be greater than the rational prejudice, great or small, against the conjunction of two claims: that there is a God who destined his human creations for a future state of existence, and that he wants to tell them about it in such a way that they can know a message comes from him. If there is a God who wants to make such a revelation known, and he wants to do it in such a way that we can't mistake it for the weird words of a
What? He found a Christian apologist defending the resurrection in a quote? Say it isn't so.
man, then there's really no other way to do it, to seal it, but by a miracle. A miracle will be the guarantee to us that this is a genuine word from God and not someone's fine-sounding philosophy or well-crafted tale. And the conjunction of these two claims, I think, not seem to any well-informed person to be so absurdly low beyond the reach of evidence. And so, again, if he wants to say that there's just no amount of evidence that could ever show that there's a miracle, well, how would he ever know that he's wrong?
Yeah.
Right. So,
that's one of the things I kind of wanted to bring up. He's charging people like Christians with an argument from incredulity by saying, hey, these explanations are not likely, they lack explanation. What do we do, right? We look at all these possible explanations and we say the best explanation, the one that fits the most data, has the most explanatory power, the least ad hoc, all this other stuff, is the resurrection hypothesis. And that's not an argument from incredulity. And
yes, it is. All right. In order to start considering supernatural explanations, you have to discredit all of the natural ones first, all of them. And even if you do discredit all of the natural ones, that doesn't mean necessarily that a miracle happened. That means maybe there's another naturalistic explanation that we haven't thought of yet or haven't discovered yet. Say Jesus did resurrect 3 days later. Does that mean God did it, or does that mean there's some sort of biological phenomenon that science has not observed yet? Right? Now we can observe that and we can figure out how it happened. Like just because.
Could this just be the first occurrence of an alien abduction?
Yeah. Could have been alien. Aliens are not supernatural, by the way.
The one and only time.
Aliens would be naturalist. Natural. That would be a naturalistic explanation.
I'll actually argue aliens.
Right?
I never argue aliens. Ever.
No, ever. No, but like
it's not my thing.
Still a bit.
Ironically enough, and I say this as charitably as possible, I think it's actually him who's kind of doing that, acting incredulous towards miracles here.
Oh well.
So
right. No, but let's be fair. Incredulity towards miracles should be your default position. Credulity is not a virtue.
No.
Right? Oh, I'm reciting Cognitive Dissonance podcast. Didn't even realize.
Yeah, but it sounds familiar. Ever heard that?
But so like, if your position is I'm going to believe everything I'm told, then miracles, yeah. If you're going to, but incredulity is resistance to that, right? So incredulity doesn't mean you don't believe. It just means, well, I mean, at its highest end, yeah, it would be I don't believe anything. But it's a scale, right? So you're going to want to lean towards the incredulity side of things, not the credulity side, until you have evidence to support being credulous. Again, if you're coming from a Christian worldview, you're already predisposed to credulous thinking when it comes to anything that supports your worldview. Mm-hmm. Christians are extremely incredulous, generally, about the worldview and miracle claims of other faith systems.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Ask Christians, just take a survey, go grab your favorite 25 Christians and say, did Muhammad get on a horse and fly to heaven? If their answer is no, they don't believe all miracles. They just believe the ones that support their faith system.
Oh, they're biased? What?
Did Augustus, the divine Caesar, miraculously become a divine being at his death during his apotheosis? If your answer is no, you only believe in miracles to support your faith system, because that was attested to by hundreds of witnesses, written about contemporaneously when it happened. People that actually name their sources, which is completely different than what we have in the gospel accounts, right?
Yep.
But hey, and he's actually got pictures of him, like what he looked like, and statues and temples dedicated to him right after he died. But hey, Jesus.
We have multiple eyewitness testimonies of the Archangel Moroni who appeared to Joseph Smith, 200 years ago? Like, we know these people's names. We know their children, their grandchildren. We know where they lived. We know their entire life. We know where they worked. But those aren't really,
Yeah, I just, I mean, yeah, let's just keep going. I'm getting these guys are
pissing you off.
No, just I don't know about you, but like Captain Deadpool and I used to be religious. Like I know where they're coming from.
Yeah.
I'm sure Captain Deadpool knows where these people are coming from.
It's a certain level of triggering.
Yeah.
To look at, it's like you're looking in a mirror and you're like, God, I used to.
Well, I was never that I didn't come from an evangelical tradition, right? So like, you grew up Greek Orthodox, man. You're kind of like, yeah, church, whatever. Like they swing some incense. We do some Jesus a couple times a year.
I was hardcore.
Yeah. And see, like I was always taught Protestants didn't understand the Bible anyway because they didn't read Greek. Like that was the apologetic for the Greek Orthodox Church. Like, well, the reason these churches don't know what's going on, they don't read the Greek, right? Like if you can read the Greek and we're like, yeah, but you don't read the Hebrew. Kind of bad joke, but
Sounds familiar. Yeah. Oh.
I just never really bought into it. So
yeah, it's frustrating because I actually wanted to be an apologist. Like I studied very hard to be an apologist. That's what I wanted to do. And so ultimately, I couldn't help but conclude all of the best arguments were terrible.
Some of the best some of the best critical textual critics that I know are former theologians. Like, again, Ehrman's a perfect example.
Yeah.
I mean, he wanted to be like, whoa, with God. Then he read his book.
And then he got mad. And then he got rich.
I'm still working on the rich part.
Go on.
I got the mad part down. I've been waiting for the rich to make its way over here. What stage of deconstruction is that?
Oh, I'm waiting for them to start telling me about the naturalistic tendency of nature.
Oh yeah, let's go. I like that part. Nature does natural stuff.
Which I suspect he will.
Fingers crossed.
Know where his objection is stemming from.
Wish granted.
Assumption that any naturalistic explanation,
if they're even still watching,
plausible, no matter how ad hoc and complicated, etc., is more probable than a miracle. And that's really what we need to, because that's Ehrman, right? That's exactly what Ehrman's.
That's not Ehrman. That's fucking logic.
That's everybody else but you guys.
Yeah. Stop accusing me of quoting Bart Ehrman. This is basic shit.
This is like basic.
This is just basic logic. No,
philosophy 101.
Well, Caleb is about to announce two theorems that are used in basic philosophy, at least in naturalistic philosophy. One of which I'm not sure if he's quoting Marx or if he's quoting. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we really need to address, because that's what's at the core. That assumption is what is at the core of his point here.
And I think that's a good point, Bremen. I can think of examples, especially the ones in my research that I talk about in my book and the one I'm working on, of testimony where I honestly think it would be more incredible or equally as incredible for it to be for the testimony to be wrong or false than it would be for the miracle to happen. One example would be a woman named Delia Knox, who was in a wheelchair for 22 years, paraplegic, who was healed at a revival meeting. And some people just say, well, she was just faking being a paraplegic for 22 years. And that, to me, that's almost even less likely as far as motivation. Another one would be there's a case of another girl who was in a wheelchair because her hip was being eaten by bone cancer. And this was seen by 18 different doctors, diagnosed and all that. So if people want to say, well, yeah, misdiagnoses happen. Well, if 18 different specialists have seen it at that point and all are in consensus of the diagnosis, that would be almost equally incredible to think that could be wrong. I know another one of a person whose throat was healed, who he went to 60 doctors, including multiple specialists in Sweden, and all of them told him.
I could tell you stories like this too.
Yeah.
It's
this was irreversible. There's no you're going to lose your voice, and then it instantly came back in a religious context. And so, like, again, it's like the chances of that many people, professionals, being wrong is extraordinarily low. So in certain cases like that, you would have to say that this is not at all a plausible explanation to say this person was lying or this was like misdiagnosis. So it just depends on the case.
Yeah.
But I think in the resurrection case, that's what people point, like Paley would point to say that the chances of them all deliberately lying and willing to die for it is even less likely than it would be for them to at least be sincerely mistaken, because that's equally as ludicrous. Yeah.
And going to Bram's point, I mean, like he said, if no matter how contrived or clumsy an explanation is, just automatically being better than a supernatural explanation, no matter
Just
how
say why. Yeah, why are you just asserting that?
Yeah, why? Why exactly? We need
because it's not a miracle.
I can tell you why.
Supernatural arguments are those that are unexplained and cannot be explained at this particular time. But that doesn't mean that it's right.
Beautiful. It's that simple.
So I totally get, like, go ahead, require more evidence for a supernatural claim. That's totally justifiable. That's fine. But saying that no amount of evidence can ever possibly overcome the prior probability, again, it just leaves you in a nigh unfalsifiable position. How can you know if you're wrong? And I mean, that's just a good question for.
If you are so willing to posit a supernatural explanation into a group of naturalistic explanations and say that this belongs here, along with all these other options, it's equally as valid because prior probability and all that shit. How do you know you are ever going to be right? Right? If you are willing to just pepper a supernatural shit into your anyway.
For anybody skeptical that's watching this, if you have no way of knowing that you're wrong, barring from God himself appearing directly to you, then
how do you know that's not a hallucination?
Again, how do you know that's right?
Well,
exactly.
Why should we believe you if you've seen
right on the head.
God appeared to you and you go and proclaim this? Is what Paul basically did. Why should I believe your
Bing, bing, bing. We have a winner.
testimony of God in this to you?
Right. Then we can just turn it around back on them. And so if you put yourself in a...
Can you though? Can you just turn it right back around on them?
You're basically kind of no different than the presuppositional apologist.
It's...
Because that's what they're doing. They're just like, oh yeah, so this is his argument. This is exactly his argument. Oh yeah, that seems plausible.
By the way, presuppositional apologetics is redundant. It's the same thing twice.
Yeah.
I know that's kind of harsh, but you're in an intellectual cul-de-sac. You have no way of getting yourself out of that pit. So you need to at least be open to the idea that yes, God could possibly exist.
Could I say one thing real quick?
Absolutely.
So I don't mean to back up, but I quickly did some Google foo. So let's talk about Delia Knox for a second. First of all, Delia Knox didn't have a spinal cord injury; she had a head injury. Second thing is that
I'm gonna grab a beer.
We need alcohol now.
The second thing is although she received extensive medical treatment, she has never released her medical records.
No.
Upon request. Like there's she never mentioned suffering paralysis. She talks about psychological trauma from the injury. She talks about there being a brain tumor. Also, she has quite a lot of claims that are miraculous.
So it's not just the one miracle; she's had many.
Yeah, and so she was actually, it says, basically, if she's not willing to let people like look at her medical records and actually talk to their doctors rather than self-attestation, a guy named Darren Slade wrote a book on it, and it's called Properly Investigating Miracles. And he actually brings up everything that's wrong. And he's saying he's not saying he doesn't believe her, but he's saying, without being able to evaluate the evidence, why would you believe
you can only assume that there's
and there's inconsistencies in her story, right? So people that have talked to her said, yeah, but you said this 10 years ago, now you're saying this today, can we see your medical records? And she says no. So like if she's so certain it's a miracle, then let professional people who have, and I don't know Slade's background, but he sounds like he's a professional investigator, maybe investigative reporter. I mean, I don't know, but like let medical personnel look at your records and see if there's a reason for you being able to walk. Because maybe you're again, how she got cured, why she was a paraplegic. She had a head injury. Maybe she had some psychosomatic illness, like, and that could be much right. And she's getting treatment. Again, stop saying shit's a miracle just because you want to say it's a miracle. And you threw out this woman like, well, she was a paraplegic for 24 years and she walked again. But let's talk about the actual evaluation. Like, I'm not convinced it's a miracle. And all I did was read one page from an author saying, this is what I've done. This is the investigation I've done. I'm unable to verify it. Right. So, let me see your medical records and then we'll talk about if it's a miracle or not.
Sure.
Yeah. Maybe not get your information from yesjesusdoesperformmiracles.com.
Right. And write a book. He wrote a chapter in a book now that he's talking about this woman and taking it as gospel, right? And I think that's a really good analogy. He's taking this woman's account as gospel, despite there being lots of reason to suspect that it at least needs to be critically evaluated before it's called a miracle.
I'm going to take a wild guess and say when you Googled her, it was like maybe the first or second link that you clicked that.
Yeah, it was about 3 or 4 down. The first 4 were all attestations of it being real, and they were all from Christian sources.
Right. So then he didn't look. He didn't research.
Right. He went to CBN, Christian Broadcasting Network, where they said, right.
Yep. Sounds about right.
We're the ones in a box, though.
We're in the intellectual cul-de-sac.
Oh, that's what it was, cul-de-sac. Yes.
Just going in circles.
And this would be one way that he could show that he does. And so, I mean, unless that's just completely not a possibility, because you're going to rule that out a priori or through evidence for atheism. But even the most philosophical atheists that I know, I mean, I'm thinking of just Ben Watkins, who debated Trent Horn on the Capturing Christianity podcast. He's open to his mind being changed through arguments, and he will at least admit that there is some.
Yeah, me too.
Same. Show me proof and arguments, and I might change my mind.
I flirted with the line of mythicist for a good while, and eventually I was like, yeah, no, that ain't it. So yeah, I'll happily change my mind.
That's where I'm at.
Yeah.
Poor Pat's getting.
I was intrigued by the arguments. They made sense. And then I critically analyzed the data and was like, yeah.
I think it's hard to explain the movement. We'll talk about this later. That's a
different thing.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm sure we could talk about this for a hot minute.
Let's get this done.
Arguments that have
home stretch. Well, almost home stretch.
So it's not completely shut off to the idea of a miracle. So yeah. Anyways.
Yeah. One more thing I wanted to say. Sorry, Graham. Go ahead.
Oh no. Okay. Actually, I'll take it this time.
Graham's been really nice.
Yes, he's been very nice.
Well, again, I know how the TikTok community is going to respond, and I'm not playing devil's advocate here. I just want to make sure that we address the points that I know that they're going to make, because I've heard them make these points. And the way they're going to get around what all of us are saying is by saying that the definition of a miracle
is one of those moments.
Is the least probable thing. And as silly as
Whose definition, Bart Ehrman's?
It's not that it's the least probable thing. That's not the definition.
That's not it.
You can't start considering supernatural options until you've eliminated all of the natural ones.
Right.
In that by definition would be the least likely explanation, but that's not
Sherlock Holmes, that bitch.
Sense.
Ehrman is very influential in the skeptical community. Right?
Again, with the Bart Ehrman.
Philosopher of religion.
Right.
There are other scholars out there.
There are so many.
That's where it's coming from. But we just need to make explicit that this is simply not true. The definition of a miracle is not the least probable thing. I like the Magru's definition of a miracle. An event that occurs if the laws of nature if nature has not been operating as it normally does.
Here it is.
And again,
It's
I
this
heard
is
that
where
right.
Caleb comes in. This is where he comes in and talks about his video.
Oh, here we go.
what you mean by laws of nature, that you can debate
I have
about
a
that.
video on this topic.
Okay,
Yeah. So
Oh,
I
good.
cover like nomic necessity theory, regulatory theory, all this other stuff up
so
there.
getting a precise definition is
What theory?
Okay, so he's talking about the gnomic necessity theory, which, when summed up, basically means that matter, in and of itself, knows what it's making. It's the idea that there's like a purpose behind it.
Self-actualization.
Yes,
Matter
exactly.
is
We
like
talked about this.
Yeah, it's a bunch of
And
bullshit.
then he talks about regulator theory, which I don't know if he's talking about voltage regulator theory, which makes sense totally when it comes to science, and that's something that is it's a regulation of itself. If it gets too high, it turns itself off. If it gets too low, it turns itself on. This is one of those arguments that they use a lot when it comes to climate change. Is voltage regulation theory, is that the Earth is using this as its own way of like Earth gets a fever and it's going to try and cool itself off. Or he could be using, and I don't think he is. He's mentioning regulator theory as the Marxist regulator theory, which is where a government is in control of its citizens, and because the government's in control of its citizens, it both controls the economy and the society. And society, if it rises with the need, then the economy complies, and so forth. So it makes a nice little regulation circle. Either one of these is something that I come across pretty often when people want to tell me that climate change isn't real. So when nature behaves a certain way, or if evolution isn't real, if nature behaves a certain way, we know that nature doesn't. These are things that I could talk about for hours. Let's put it that way.
I appreciate your restraint.
But yeah, instead of me getting into this, I will let it go for now. But I will have to find this video he has. And look at it. Anyway,
Looking forward to that. You should make a TikTok about it.
Possibly.
but we can just rule out completely this idea that a miracle is by definition the least probable thing.
Yeah, and I was going to go off of that too, Bram, of saying if you're going to make that position, you need to have the ratios intact to say for every miracle claim there's X number of natural, because the issue is that we really don't know what the prior probability actually is. Yes, I don't think anyone denies that miracles are less common.
All right.
We're actually debating the commonality of miracles.
Yep.
Apparently.
And there's certain ratios that we have to have intact or something.
Well, I think it's funny because, again, the definition of miracle is something done through divine causation, period. Like that's what a miracle is. I mean, if you want supernatural interference or something done through supernatural means, that's what. Okay. All right. But whatever.
Yeah.
Such a low prior to begin with. We don't really know what the prior is, but I don't think it's anywhere near as low as people want to argue.
Yep.
Demonstrate that.
Anything else you guys want to add?
Demonstrate one fucking miracle where I can watch it.
Yeah.
That's all I ask. One.
There are cameras everywhere.
And again, you're talking about divine manifestation, right? This is you guys are the believers. I'm the skeptic. You tell me where and when you're going to work your fucking mumbo jumbo.
Provide your burden of proof.
And right. And that's it. And it can be something pretty simple. You don't have to bring a person back to life. You don't even have to bring a mammal back to life. Bring an arthropod back to life. Bring a lower order of life back to life. I mean,
make the cockroach live.
Exactly. You bring the cockroach back to life. I mean, I'll even go jellyfish. Like, we'll get away from
jellyfish is harder. You can't always tell if a jellyfish is alive anyway.
Well, all right. Well, again, we'll something.
There's some issues naturally with that.
I mean, how about a squid? Right? Okay. Whatever. You guys figure it out.
A tardigrade.
Tardigrade. Oh my God! Yeah, those goddamn fucking.
They're pretty much impossible to kill. So
little water bears.
Bring that to life.
Water bears live through anything.
Been raised from the dead. But to say that this one time it did happen because there are stories that were written about it by people who were not eyewitnesses is bananas. So if that's what you want to believe, then that's on you. But you cannot suggest that this is anything other than faith. because there's no possible way to verify the claims of a miraculous event that happened 2,000 years ago. Again, according to our earliest sources, I don't believe Jesus was buried in a tomb at all. Rant over. Do with that information what you will. Why is the rum gone?
All right, so
Rome is gone.
I mean, just that last clip kind of gave a few more things to add in.
He said, did he say no one else has ever been raised from the dead?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think Matt Dillahunty pulled that card too, didn't he? When I was discussing with him.
Matt fucking Dillahunty? That's who I'm copying now?
Wow, you're ripping off.
I'm saying no one's ever.
Yeah. Oh, I'll just. Oh, shit.
I highly recommend anybody that hasn't watched your debate with Matt Dillahunty watch.
So yeah, Caleb Jackson has debated Matt Dillahunty. I need to find this clip.
Yeah, I need to see this.
It never made air, so
Yeah.
unfortunately not. But it would
God.
have. But I would just say, if you've read, this is the first volume, Craig Keener's book. He spends 50 pages on cases that modern day people raised from the dead. So just to throw that out.
Really? 50
There's
people
such a
been
thing
raised
as
from the dead?
CPR, guys.
Which one of them is Jesus? Why is Jesus the Messiah, not one of them?
Oh, actually, I could be a first-hand account on this.
How so?
I've come back from the dead.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. And like they also can't be serious right now. Like
I'm
obviously,
just
I'm
having a
not
hard time.
saying-
Yeah,
Obviously, I'm not saying nobody's ever been resurrected after dying.
I have
Or
apparently.
revived after dying.
My machine.
That's obviously not what the fuck I'm saying here.
My machine is God. Oh my God, everything's clicking.
Yeah, my grandmother
Deus
died for like 8 minutes and was revived, and she was batshit crazy when she came back. By the way, she was not the same person.
I don't think I was dead that long.
It was like it's been a while since I heard the story. It's like 6 or 8 minutes. I don't know.
No one was there to claim my death, though. I was by myself in my house. My pacemaker recorded it, though.
Damn, that is luck. Praise you, Jesus.
Praise
And
him.
by doctors with medical documentation. Anyone?
They've been witnessed by doctors because they're done in a hospital. They said clear and put the shocky pads on their chest, and then the guy's heart started again.
That's what
Doctor can attest it. That miracle,
literally
you guys, had
describing my
nothing to fucking do with the 9,000 volts being plunged through his fucking stomach. Oh, we've been doing this too long.
2020 tried to kill me, man. It did. Anyway, let's get to the part where they praise you again.
You can't verify an event 2,000 years ago. Well, I guess I would say, well, okay, let's just can we verify stuff that happened today though? Like if someone like I don't know Greg Spencer, who was legally blind with macular degeneration, was no-see blind and was instantly healed after prayer, and now we have his doctor record saying he can instantly see again if this disease.
Is this going to be another one of those stories if we looked up this name?
Probably.
Doesn't have a cure.
It's like Lazarus. He was choking on a hot dog, had to pound him in the back. Oh my God, you saved my life.
And study him and see. Yes, of course we can. So the point is, yeah, you can verify stuff like this today. You can do pre and post things after prayer, which people have done. So why can't we infer that in history as well? If you're going to grant that stuff like this can still happen today, it's not nearly as improbable as it might be to say that. And of course, I think that Eric has said this before, I'm quoting Thomas Butler, but when talking about verifying before and after, it doesn't take a genius to verify that someone has been dead and then has been raised again. All you have to do to show Jesus rose from the dead is to show that he was alive, which everyone can do.
Yep.
Just look at someone who's alive to see that they're dead. Which
Jesus mythicism has entered the chat.
Right, and then someone was alive again. So we already know how to say people are alive. We already know how to say.
Do we though? Because there is testimony to people not being able to tell whether someone's alive or dead. We know this because there have been moments when people have found scratch marks on coffins.
Yeah, so they started installing
bells put on to,
bells.
yeah, we've seen bells put on with strings in case they just happen to be alive. Now, granted, it is, again, unusual, but not impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a more naturalistic design than someone just miraculously coming back from the dead.
It's weird that God would raise those or make those people come back alive, but like not give them a way to escape dying again from suffocation.
That's fucking horrifying.
It is. It is. God's a prick. What can I say?
same person alive afterwards in that order. That's technically all you would have to have. So.
Right. Let me read the quote. It's Thomas Sherlock.
Thomas Sherlock.
And then we can wrap up. But he says, this is before Hume, by the way. He says, suppose you saw a man publicly executed, his body afterward wounded by the executioner, and carried and laid in a grave, that after you should be told that the man came to life again. What would you suspect in the case? Not that the man had ever been dead, for you saw yourself, but you would expect that whether he was now alive. But would you say that this case excluded all human testimony, and that men could not possibly discern whether one whom they converse with familiar with
is this still going?
On what ground can you say this? The man rising from the grave. Here's the kind of the money quote part. The money part of the quote.
We're almost done.
The man rising from the grave is an object of sense and can give the same evidence of being alive as any other man in the world can give. So that a resurrection considered only a fact to be proved by evidence is a plain case. It requires no greater ability in the witnesses that they should be able to distinguish between a man dead and a man alive, a point to which I believe every man living thinks himself to be a judge. And he finishes up by saying, I do allow that this case and others of like nature require more evidence to give them credit than ordinary cases do. You may therefore require more evidence in these than other cases, but it is absurd to say that such cases admit no evidence when the things in question are manifestly objects of sense. So,
yeah. There was something I wanted to say, but now it's escaping me. Shoot.
So you're about to say you regret making this video.
I know. Yeah, I don't think we have to cover the whole. I don't think we have to cover the whole faith thing that he said here.
No, of course not. Why not?
No.
We don't need to cover the faith thing.
Drink the
because
Kool-Aid.
they know I'm right.
Drink the Kool-Aid.
Because they know I'm right. Deep down, they know I'm right.
You want to say, like, he's using the word verify here, and it almost sounds like we're jumping back into the 1900s and hitting like logical verification to get like.
Which is ironic because half their sources come from the early 1900s. Sorry.
It's the double standard for me.
I'm just floored. That's fine.
Verify history.
Yeah, like we're saying this is the best explanation. Do you need like 100% credence in this hypothesis to say that you believe it?
How you
Or,
term
are
hypothesis.
you okay with the 70% credence? Like,
can you verify that Julius Caesar was stabbed to death by Brutus? I mean, I don't know if we have the.
It wasn't just Brutus.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, can you verify other minds exist? Even today, like, can you verify other minds exist?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, now we're getting into philosophy in general.
So, but you know what? I don't think we know Caesar died. It appears he was murdered.
Yeah, they're actually right to an extent. There's
right. We don't know. We don't know if Brutus was just a conspirator or if he actually did it. Right? Like
we know about the letter. We know that there was graffiti on the wall talking about Brutus being an enemy of Caesar.
Right.
We don't necessarily know if Brutus took the stabbing himself, but
I mean, when I teach it, I say, yeah, was one of the conspirators, right? That's how we teach it. But then again, when Caesar died, he rose to heaven too. How come you guys don't,
Yeah.
Right.
I think
they don't believe that miracle, though.
I don't think they understand that Mark Antony was head priest to Caesar's cult. That Mark Antony had a girlfriend named Cleopatra, former wife of Caesar, or former girlfriend.
Right. Well, but Mark Antony also claimed to be Osiris. So Horus. He claimed to be.
I'm just saying Mark Antony partied pretty good.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. Mark Antony was a partier.
That's a man who is living his best life now. Joel Osteen reference.
Yes.
Nailed it. Okay, just a little bit longer. I think I can take it.
Malcolm, it's in like one of the first few pages of his book, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses. And he says, look, eyewitness testimony as a category invites trust. History is based on the epistemology of trust, not blind trust. not just blind credulity.
I mean, faith isn't blind trust.
Good reasons and bad reasons for trusting certain testimonies. And what we're arguing is that the Gospels provide us good testimony concerning the events or reports, more specifically the resurrection. So yeah, it involves trust, but it's not trust that's misplaced. It's well-placed
Or
trust.
blind or anything.
I love that he keeps using the word trust, but didn't want to talk about faith earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Like isn't it, without faith it's impossible to please God? So why are you
Well, but you have
insisting
to
it's not
trust
faith
God in
anymore?
order to have faith in Him,
Yeah.
though.
Trust.
I want Bram to be convicted of murder, triple homicide, on death row. He's on death row, but I'm going to write a confession. I'm not going to sign it and see whether or not it gets him. I'm going to send him this, mail it to him.
Mm-hmm.
No name on it, but I'm going to say, I'm a murderer. I did it, but I'm not going to sign it. And I'm going to have him take that judge, see how that goes.
I have it on good authority.
Can imagine the
I
judge being
didn't do
like, "Wow,
this because
it's
of
all
this
here.
letter."
Wow, you're
Or
free
even
judge."
better, I'm a witness that can prove Bram didn't do it, but I won't give you my information.
Ooh, harsh.
I'm the witness that won't come forward, but I'll write a note
Right.
and not sign it.
Right.
Oh, yeah, that's.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We're gonna have to do a live stream on gospel reliability next to back that up.
Yeah.
Right.
No, you don't have to. There's no need.
Let's do it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
By the way, just as a comment for the people in the comments saying that I need a camera, if you want to send me one, go ahead. Like I will take a free camera and we'll use
Well, I
it
mean,
for
here
future
we got a
podcasts.
comment right here.
Yes,
This
that's
is where they just talk about Eddie, and then they
If
go
you
into
want to send me a
praising
camera,
him.
I will absolutely take it and I will use it. So
Very nice.
go right ahead, please.
Awesome. Well, do you guys have anything else you want to add in before we kind of close out the stream here?
Yeah, I mean, I do. Real quick, I think that the nature of TikTok, and I think it's totally legit for.
All right, so now they go into how
great you are. All praise Dadpool. We all love him.
they like me
Mutual
now.
respect. We weren't here to bash you at all.
They bashed you for
they
2
didn't bash
hours
me.
for
I wouldn't call it bashing.
No.
I probably
They
did
picked
way more
apart the
bashing
argument.
here. But to be fair, they did throw the first punch. So if you guys are in the chat still, I don't know. You haven't seen
I think
me
they
for a
probably
while.
all went to bed at this point.
Yeah, probably the it's 12:30. If you pull this up in the morning, I hope you had a good night's sleep and watch it. I get kind of spicy with you guys because you're fucking infuriating. All right, but y'all seem like okay dudes. All right, I got nothing against y'all.
But
if they come back and watch this, let's just say instead of you guys making a reaction to our reaction to your reaction, let's have a discussion sometime.
have a discussion and have a formal discussion.
I like the idea of having, if you don't want to do a debate, we can just do a discussion, but I'm very interested in moderating a back and forth.
And bring your sources. Dadpool
Make sure
will
you read them first.
Yeah. Sorry. 1 minute, buddy.
You're good.
Yeah, no, I think what Pat's saying, bring your sources, be prepared to argue.
Bring your sources, list them out, right? Dadpool and Nat will put their sources out. You can cross-inspect each other's sources, because that's part of actually evaluating each other's evidence, right? Don't just show up and say, well, this guy with this book, and hold up the book, because that's not actually how this is done. And it's not just saying I have 300 apologists that are saying I'm right. Let's look at the actual scholarship. Let Dadpool get into the Greek. When you say, well, the Greek says this, and then he can say, no, the Greek actually says this. And then we can, but don't just say, because have a dialogue, discuss the topic, discuss evidence. What is evidence? What is good evidence? Define that before you even start, because,
I like that.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, granted, only about 1/3 of this whole thing was up my alley when it comes to information. So I will graciously monitor what I can't argue.
Yeah.
But
I'll take all 4 of them.
You'll just take all 4 of them. You're not cocky at all.
Well, but no, I think if you did take all four of them, I think it's important to note that, like, when they come into this, they need to understand that, like, they're the one claiming a divinity.
Yeah.
Right. They're making the positive claim. You're not. Again, you could just as easily say, okay, I'm going to approach this, put on your I'm a Muslim for the day hat. Convince me of this, right? Convert me to your faith, right? Because are you going to be able to do that? I just don't think they can.
Yeah.
That's fair. Well, I want to thank our followers that are still with us for sticking around.
Some of you guys stuck with us the whole time.
I'm really impressed by that. Yeah. I want to thank Pat for jumping back in when we lost Jim, because that was awesome.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, thanks so much, Pat.
Yeah,
I might jump into Discord for a quick minute, but I probably won't stay for very long.
Thank you all. Thanks for having me. I'm gonna punch out. Take care.
Cool. See you, Pat.
See you next time.
But yeah, I think we made it all the way through in one shot, which granted it took 3.5 hours to do, but we did it.
We wanted to keep it under 3 hours, but
we tried, but it's kind of hard.
Missed it by that much.
So close. So yeah. Good night, everybody, and catch us next week.
Yep. Thanks again, guys. Love y'all. Bye.
Bye.
This is fun. Let's never do it again.